Right, so welcome back after our tea break, and some new people have joined us. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our next speaker, who's called Annalisa Derr, and she's going to be talking on Mary Magdalene Remythologized, affirming female bodily power and embodied menstrual ritual as healing practice. And she'll no doubt explain what all that means very shortly. We did have a speaker, Tori Milner, talk about this in the south of France at one of our last conferences, who had based her work on it. So I'll mention that later in the discussion. Let me first of all introduce Annalisa, because she's got a very impressive CV. I'm going to really summarize this. Annalisa is a goddess scholar, a storyteller, and a Mary Magdalene devotee. And she's, at the moment, she's writing up her dissertation, which is on the changing attitudes for women to the question of menstruation. It's a huge topic, and she's doing this at the Pacifica Graduate Institute, which I've known about for years, and I've always loved their work. I mean, I'm a kind of Jungian myself, so they're like our little outpost in California. And she's created a thing called the Journey to the Goddess TV, a whole TV channel on the Journey to the Goddess. So everyone should join that and watch her amazing videos. She's doing great work on that.
Thank you.
She's also interviewed goddess scholars around the world, artists, devotees, and so I can't recommend her too highly. She's also helped with other websites. There's one called sheIsLove.com, which is one that she's been involved with up till recently, still a little bit. And basically, she's a goddess at large in California, although she's speaking to us from Seattle, I think, today, which is, there's a few problems been going on there, so maybe she'll address that. So anyway, Annalisa, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for getting up at 7 a.m. to join us. That is amazing.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and to talk about Our Lady of the Day, Magdalene. So, and thank you for that warm welcome. That was incredible. Yes, so let me try to put on my host disabled attendee sharing screen. Can you enable me to share my PowerPoint? So while you're doing that, I'll just address the Seattle thing. We're in really good shape. There was a little bit of a movement happening in a very small located area in downtown Seattle, but that's been dispersed and everyone's working out kind of the issues at hand. And
I think you can share the screen now. I've enabled it.
Oh, yes. Oh, great. Thank you. All right. Can you see it?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Then I will get going. So, who is Mary Magdalene? A priestess, a prostitute, the wife and beloved of Jesus, a devotional spiritual aspirant, a spiritual teacher and authority, a leader, a mother, a contemplative ascetic, a repentant sinful woman, the first witness to Jesus's resurrection? Or is she something more timeless, more archetypal, more iconic, more mythical, and even cosmic? This is a question that has mystified many seekers and opponents of the Magdalene for nearly 2,000 years. For me, she embodies many of these roles, and I believe that she is the every woman, appearing to each of us in a form that most resonates with our own soul. I relate to Mary Magdalene as a human woman with whom I can understand my experience as a woman. But I also see her as a manifestation of the cosmic feminine principle, Shakti, who guides me through the depths of healing my own internalized shame and sexism around female embodiment and sexuality. I believe that many women experience, consciously or unconsciously, this particular shaming as a result of thousands of years of patriarchal conditioning. So the majority of modern Magdalenian scholarship has centered on reclaiming Magdalene as a spiritual leader within early Christian movement or as a potential partner of Christ. And they have effectively deconstructed Magdalene's highly sexualized persona, but rarely have I come across attempts to rehabilitate female sexuality or female embodiment from a feminist perspective. Locating myself within the traditions of goddess reclaiming and feminist theory, my work focuses on remythologizing Mary Magdalene as a symbol of embodied feminine power. I do this in two ways. First, by framing Mary Magdalene within the Neolithic great goddess worshiping traditions, and second, with enactments of menstrual ritual performances. By remythologizing Mary Magdalene within a tradition that views the female body as life-affirming and sacred, embodiment becomes a radical act of self and collective healing. So in this presentation, I will cover feminist methodologies and why they are important when looking at figures like Mary Magdalene, how Mary Magdalene came to symbolize shameful female sexuality, the consequences of pathologizing women in our bodies and how this might lead to women's internalized sexism and shame for our bodies. And finally, then I will discuss my ritual performances, including the why and how I mythologize Mary Magdalene as a symbol of embodied feminine power. So just a brief overview, situating myself as the researcher. First and foremost, I'm a Mary Magdalene devotee, and second, a Magdalene scholar. My journey with Mary Magdalene began shortly after I spent some time in India training in classical Indian dance. While there, I felt the presence of the divine feminine in the dances, in the rituals, in the land, and in every interaction I had with the individuals while I was there. She, the great goddess, is there, and it is palpable. But I felt something missing, and I longed to discover this feminine presence within the culture that I was raised in. When I came back, and I was living in New York City at that time, I was sitting in meditation one day, and Mary Magdalene came to me in this meditation, and she has been my teacher ever since. I'm sure many of you can relate to this. You probably have some story like this. She took me on a pilgrimage and to her sacred sites in France, which quite literally changed the trajectory of my life. And I believe that it is her Shakti that brought me to graduate school so that I could learn more about her. And in the process of graduate school, quite unexpectedly, she's teaching me how to heal the shame that I feel toward female embodiment. Okay. So feminist methodologies, and this is a beautiful plate from the Judy Chicago permanent exhibit, The Dinner Party at the Brooklyn Museum. Okay, so feminist methodologies look to uncover women's stories, especially in their own words. So with regard to Mary Magdalene, I hold that she is a biblical character in a narrative story, actually a collection of stories from the New Testament and the Gnostic Gospels. While I acknowledge that Magdalene may have been a historical person, was likely a historical person, I'm not concerned as much with the historical Magdalene. My primary reason is that there is no direct link to Mary Magdalene. So everything we have access to with regard to her that I know of has been mediated and interpreted and reinterpreted by others who may have, as scholarship suggests, largely revisioned Mary Magdalene to serve various socio-political and religious agendas. So there are no works left behind by Magdalene that can tell us what she truly felt or experienced. Even the Gospel of Mary, which we know is attributed to her, was written in, I believe, the 2nd century CE, several generations after Magdalene's death and Jesus's death. This doesn't make it any less relevant. It is very, very important. And it gives us insight into that world and who Mary Magdalene may have been. But for me, in order to discover a more relatable Mary Magdalene, I aim to use an approach called a usable past, which is outlined by Buddhist and feminist scholar of religion, Rita M. Gross. So Gross explains two major tenets of feminist critiques of religion. There's feminist history that strives for historical accuracy, and there's also a feminist usable past, which aims to employ imaginative reconstructions of female mythic and historic figures to create empowering myth models. It is, quote, feminism as social vision, and proposes reconstructions of current religions and societies to render them just and equitable to women, and thereby also to men. So this next point is key to understanding my work. According to her, a feminist usable past is important because, quote, a community constitutes itself by a means of a collective memory, the past that it recalls and emulates. When the record discounts or ignores women, the community is telling itself and its women something about women's potential and place in the community. So I believe that the most important thing that we can do with Mary Magdalene is to apply both the feminist historical method and also a feminist usable past. Many have and continue to use the historical approach to recognize where and when Magdalene has been delegitimized in the religious culture and how the treatment of her and other figures in the Bible contributes to how the community treats women. The follow-up to that would be to investigate how women who have been affected by Christianity might internalize harmful negatives about figures such as Mary Magdalene. So with that second approach, we can begin to look beyond the historical Mary Magdalene and instead focus on the mythological or the archetypal Mary Magdalene. This Magdalene, I believe, is rich with potential and is not confined by definition. She can be whatever a person or a community needs her to be at any given time. So let me give a few quick definitions so we're all on the same page. What is an archetype? In my understanding, the psychologist Carl Jung described an archetype as an eternal energy pattern residing in the collective unconscious, which arises in different cultures in a variety of forms. And what is a myth? For me, a mythology is a template that structures the way a person or community sees and functions in the world. It is the lens through which we understand the world and our place in it. So both archetypes and mythologies reflect and affect how a person or a community behaves and how others see that individual or community. Okay, a brief overview of prostitution in the ancient world. So these are the questions I've asked myself since becoming a Magdalene devotee. Why did Mary Magdalene become a prostitute in the mythic imagination? Why is female sexuality dangerous? Why are females dangerous? Why do any of these questions matter? Well, to me, the questions matter because, as Rita Gross said, the way Mary Magdalene is portrayed in the religious culture is telling the culture, our Western culture, about women's purpose and place in society. So today in the modern world, at least theoretically, we are starting to humanize prostitutes and sex workers. We see them as people who have intrinsic value. In the ancient world, as we all probably know, they were much more commodified. Then, as today, prostitution can be analyzed as a socioeconomic category with political implications, and it can be analyzed also from a religious and philosophical standpoint. From the socioeconomic standpoint, commercial prostitution was the sexual regulation of women dating back to Mesopotamia. Feminist historian Gerda Lerner argues that it resulted in the development of a class binary between virginal and good elite women, which was a financial boon for the family, versus the lower class and slave women who were by force or choice relegated as sexual property, also a financial boon. Cultic or sacred prostitution was also more or less practiced, although there is mounting disagreement on how or where it is practiced, which I won't go into today. So from a religious standpoint, I think it is worth considering prostitution within the context of the ancient taboo system, where certain human conditions or activities were considered impure or defiling to the sacred realm or a particular deity. These defiling taboos generally included death, disease, birth, menstruation, and sex. Thus, sex, or as some scholars have argued, sexual fluids, were considered threatening to the divine. In this respect, with the exception of cultic prostitution, it is easy to see how prostitution could be considered a dangerous activity because it was a threat to the sacred realm and deities. And then prostitutes themselves would then have been dangerous individuals. Because prostitutes have predominantly been women and girls throughout history, it is again easy to see how the dangers of sexuality could most easily be projected onto women. Finally, it is worth noting that the taboos of birth and menstruation are specific to female bodies. These two female-specific taboos, put together with the regulation of female sexuality, contributes to a religious worldview that considers the female body, and hence women, dangerous. And so now, women and men and Aristotle. I believe that it is also important to consider prostitution within the philosophical point of view on the nature of women and men, which really began to take shape with Aristotle. In his view, women were imperfect males. He contributed to a hierarchical vision of the sexes in which men were associated with reason and women with nature and matter. This is important because his philosophy, along with Platonic and Neoplatonic thought, greatly influenced the thinking of church theologians on the nature of women and men. The hierarchy continued, with men, spirit and transcendence, seen as superior to women, nature, matter, and the body. In order to be close to God, the body was viewed as something to transcend rather than to be lived in. In this worldview, women, especially prostitutes, were problematic. As summarized by Eva Cantarella, quote, "The demonization of all women, except the Virgin Mary, was in sharp contrast to the exaltation of the ascetic model and chastity. The fathers praised the refusal of sex, except within the marriage for the purposes of procreation, and it was viewed as an evil link to nature, to be conquered or at least controlled," end quote. So women, by our association with nature and matter, were considered evil and dangerous. And clearly, prostitutes as purveyors of the flesh were the ultimate problem for Christianity. This is exemplified in the fact that, according to Hippolytus of Rome, brothel owners could become Christians, but prostitutes could not, unless, of course, they ceased to be prostitutes. So, making Mary Magdalene a fallen woman. By this, was she a fallen woman? First of all, by all historical evidence, the answer is no. In fact, as likely many here are aware, the Catholic Church officially recanted its position on Mary Magdalene in 1969 and declared that she was not a prostitute. So where did this story originate? She was made into a prostitute. Starting in the 4th century in the Latin West, Christian theologians began to construct a Mary Magdalene as a penitent whore. Eventually, Magdalene was merged with the other Marys into what is referred to today as the composite Mary Magdalene. In 596 CE, Mary was solidified as a prostitute or a fallen woman by Pope Gregory the Great in his infamous Homily 33, which I will read for you now. "She whom Luke calls the sinful woman, whom John calls Mary, we believe to be the Mary from whom 7 devils were ejected according to Mark. And what did these 7 devils signify if not vices? It is clear, brothers, that the woman previously used the unguent to perfume her flesh in forbidden acts, which she therefore displayed more scandalously. She was now offering to God in a more praiseworthy manner. She had coveted with earthly eyes, but now, through penitence, these are consumed tears. She displayed her hair to set off her face, but now her hair dries her tears. She has spoken proud things with her mouth, but on kissing the Lord's feet, she now planted her mouth on the Redeemer's feet. For every delight, therefore, she had had in herself, she now immolated herself. She turned the mass of her crimes to virtues in order to serve God entirely in penance, for as much she had wrongly held God in contempt." So what are the implications of branding Mary Magdalene a prostitute? There are undoubtedly many, but the 2 primary ones that come to my mind are branding her as such undermines her role as a spiritual leader in the church. This has been discussed by many scholars. And it also makes her an example for other Christians to follow even today. Basically, if a sinful woman such as her could change her ways and be forgiven by Christ, then so can anyone else. But the archetypal Mary Magdalene. So Mary Magdalene was made in the mythological imagination as a prostitute to serve socio-political and religious agendas. But can we extrapolate some archetypal material from this version of Mary Magdalene? Yes, absolutely. All is not lost. I believe we can place this version of Mary Magdalene within the lineage of the goddesses of love, especially those love goddesses coming from the Near East and Mediterranean traditions. In fact, the Babylonian Ishtar, and to a lesser extent, the Sumerian Inanna, are goddesses of love who are associated with brothels, prostitutes, and other liminal deities and humans who live on the fringes of societies. So we can already see a parallel there with Mary Magdalene, who is the patron or matron saint of prostitutes. Like Mary Magdalene, these goddesses are also best understood when examined within their socio-political and religious traditions. But we can also learn from their mythological symbolism how we can perhaps enrich Mary Magdalene with symbolism of the goddess. In the case of Ishtar and Inanna, they were not just goddesses of love, but they were also goddesses of war and hence death. Some scholars believe that these goddesses were later versions of the ancient Neolithic great goddess, who was believed to embody the life cycle from birth, growth, death, decay, and rebirth. So if we place Mary Magdalene within this lineage, does she also come to symbolize not just erotic love, but maybe also the life-affirming powers of creation, death, and rebirth? I will explore this version of Mary Magdalene a little bit later in the presentation. So now we come to the cave-dwelling Mary Magdalene. The danger of the female body in relation to Mary Magdalene is also exemplified in the medieval legend in which she becomes a post-prostitute, world-renouncing ascetic. So many of you, I'm sure, if not all of you, are familiar with this story, so I will be very brief in my description. After the crucifixion, Magdalene was said to have made her way to France, then Gaul, where she taught to the inhabitants the word of Christ. She finally retired to the cave La Sainte Baume, where she spent 30 years in prayer, and she didn't eat, but was lifted to heaven 7 times a day by angels, where she received sustenance in the form of spiritual manna. So I believe that Mary Magdalene's asceticism was used to reaffirm a religious hierarchy and ascribed gender norms, where men continue to be associated with spirit and transcendence, and women with matter, the body, earth, sin, and lust. During the 13th and 14th centuries, the body was debased and bodily mortification was considered saintly. In this legend, Mary Magdalene is praised as a saint who renounces her body. Remember, the body is associated with nature and women, and she renounces her body in place of spiritual sustenance. In doing so, she became, at least metaphorically, male. She embodies the qualities associated with men, spirit and transcendence, which are seen as the most virtuous route to God, while at the same time denying those things believed to be both inferior and feminine. In this way, I believe that one of the meanings of this legend is to transmit the idea that the female body, once the primary symbol attributed to Mary Magdalene, is problematic and meant to be overcome or at least controlled. So a bit of historical accuracy here. There were actual women renunciates from the Middle Ages who practiced bodily mortification, most notably fasting. And there are records for some of these women which indicate a loss of menses and breast atrophy. So in a metaphorical way, like Magdalene, they too became like men, or at least the male ideal. So religious politics aside, I want to note that I actually really love this legend and I find great value in it. And the cave at La Sainte Baume is where I've had some of my most profound spiritual experiences. In fact, similar to the previous example, I believe that we can peruse this legend for some archetypal material on the goddess. It contains a lot of goddess symbolism. And one such example is the cave itself, which is an ancient symbol of the womb and the tomb of the goddess. So briefly here, I want to talk about internalized sexism. So after the US presidential election, I had a very potent dream, the 2006 presidential election. I had a very potent dream that resulted in 3 central images: a packet of seeds, Hillary Clinton, and Planned Parenthood. I applied Jungian dream analysis to amplify these 3 images. And they revealed to me my internalized sexism and misogyny, or what Jungian Damaris Ware refers to as internalized depression, which, quote, refers to the process by which women internalize patriarchal society's definition of themselves and learn how to oppress themselves inwardly with patriarchy's alienating assessment of them. From a depth psychological point of view, I encountered what is called my shadow material, that which resides in the unconscious realm of my psyche. In my conscious persona, I am an ardent feminist, yet I discovered that in the unconscious, in my unconscious, I harbor a deep shame and humiliation for my body, my female body, processes, and sexuality. And that was devastating to admit and to confront, and still is. So after this dream, I was able to recall numerous encounters in which my psyche had attempted to communicate these hidden feelings of shame to me. And it was through engagement with this dream that I realized why I had been drawn to Mary Magdalene, and perhaps why she was drawn to me. Through engaging with her mythologies, I'm learning how to heal my relationship to what it means to be a woman. And I believe this is why many people, especially women, are drawn to Mary Magdalene. Many of us in our own way are healing our relationship to being a woman. And I hope in the process, we're changing the culture, the Western culture's relationship to women. So now we get into the performance pieces. In this next section, I will talk about embodying Mary Magdalene in ritual performance. These are truly works in process. When I started, I did not know that these performances would function as a method for healing. But with each performance, I have come face to face with new layers of healing as I confront my own discomfort for my body. I've come to learn that embodiment is key, where I take theories and ideas and I play them out through my body as Mary Magdalene, as well as some other female figures and goddesses. I hope that these ritual performance pieces and future performances and embodiment workshops help other women come home to their bodies as well. So as I was preparing to do my first of these performances, it started as a collaboration with Lisa LEVART, who's a photographer, and her business is called Goddess on Earth. I was looking through images of pre-monotheistic goddesses. They are all nude, as you can see here. They are either standing erect or they're in some form of movement, like Asherah here, and are looking directly at the viewer. These goddesses are fully self-possessed in their female bodies. There's no sense of shame or fear or danger in these goddesses, no hypersexualization like there is with some images of Mary Magdalene. I realized then that I actually needed to portray Mary Magdalene nude in our collaboration in order to express female embodiment from the feminine perspective. So finding Mary Magdalene in the lineage of the great goddess. So archaeomythologist Maria Gimbutas theorized that Neolithic Europeans revered the female body and symbolically depicted the connection between female biophysiology with cosmic and natural rhythms of cyclic regeneration. Gimbutas believed that regeneration was the core cosmological principle or paradigm of these people. The phases inherent to regeneration, birth, nurturing, growth, decay, and rebirth, were associated with a great goddess that was present in animal, plant, and human biophysiological cycles. It is this great goddess tradition that would later show up in a variety of other goddesses from the Near Eastern and European traditions, ranging from mother goddesses such as Cybele and Demeter, to love goddesses such as Aphrodite and Venus, to goddesses of death such as Medusa and Ereshkigal. This is the lineage that I feel that the archetypal Mary Magdalene belongs to. Her mythologies point to her as an archetypal figure who symbolically embodies the qualities of life, growth, death, and rebirth. So these are two of the photos from my collaboration with Lisa. I'll just briefly go through some of the images. Unfortunately, you can't see the unction jar, but I had a big clay pot for that. You can see the red cape there. We know red is generally associated with Mary Magdalene, and I wanted to emphasize maybe some of the luxury of Mary Magdalene. I was wearing a jade necklace, and I was told that jade anchors in the feminine energy. I have the Rose of Jericho plant in my hand, which is also known as the resurrection plant, because it can live in a dry for a long time. And as soon as moisture hits it, it'll open up. And then the halo I have on my head was made by another friend, artist friend, and you can't tell in the photos, but it was made with a copper, and copper is associated with Venus. And so I wanted that symbolism in there as well. And there's a few flowers in the halo. And originally I had made a dress. It was all white with I had sewed some roses on it because I wanted it to look like as Mary walked through the desert, roses began to bloom up her dress. And roses are also an ancient symbol of the goddess and the vulva. And we shot this in the desert in Simi Valley, California. And obviously, the thing I haven't mentioned yet is the menstrual blood, which we also used in this collaboration. And it was not intended, it was a possibility, but in the moment it seemed like that was the thing to do. So why did I use it, and why do I continue to use menstrual blood in performance? And it's actually quite simple. There is mounting evidence that menstrual blood was once considered a life-affirming symbol associated with death and rebirth by our Paleolithic and Neolithic ancestors in Eurasia. This was also linked to the powers of life and death of the great goddess. The meaning of menstrual blood began to change in the Mesopotamian period with the development of civilization. Since then, menstrual blood has come to symbolize death, danger, sin, and pollution. Along with the dangers of birth and female sexuality, the status of women began to decline. Even today, menstrual blood is largely considered problematic in Western culture and many other cultures. It is my belief that these negative meanings attributed to menstruation have an impact on women's psyches, including my own. And I believe such cultural beliefs contribute to the internalization of shame for and fear of our bodies. So I use the menstrual blood to normalize women's experiences, women's bodies, and our bodily processes. That's that collaboration. And then the last performance I'm going to show here is called She is Risen, a revisioning of the Easter story. And so this was a performance piece, and it was one of many performance pieces from a series I called She Bleeds the World into Existence. This particular performance was inspired by an Easter story from the Eastern Orthodox tradition. In the story, Mary Magdalene travels to Rome after Jesus' death and resurrection. She meets the Emperor Tiberius. He tells her that a man could no more resurrect from the dead than the egg in her hand could turn red. In that very moment, the egg turned red. On the surface, this story is about Jesus' power to bring about life after death. But to me, I see hidden in this story ancient goddess symbols of death and rebirth with Mary Magdalene at its center. So I traveled to Rome, where I secretly performed a retelling of this Eastern Orthodox story, and I did it on Easter Eve, like an hour before Easter. It was laden with this goddess symbolism, and my hope is that a retelling of this story that centers the feminine will inspire women to come home to their inner feminine power and wisdom. So I'm going to talk about a few of the symbols, and then I'm going to show you the performance. The egg. So in many creation stories, the universe is birthed from a cosmic egg, as a child is birthed from her mother's womb. The egg is like a cosmic womb, dark, enclosed, and the primeval home to all of creation. Though the ancients weren't aware of it, as far as we know, the ovum, the egg inside a woman's womb, is another parallel to the cosmic egg. The macrocosmic egg is then mirrored in the microcosmic egg. I believe that the cosmic egg represents the totality of the creative center, of the feminine creative center and her creative potential. And this is also a symbol that comes up a lot in Gimbutas's work with the great goddess. Even though Jesus is the egg in this story, I believe that originally the symbolism referred to the divine feminine power to create new life. Next, the color red. So this symbol I worked with because it can symbolize the power imbued in women's blood. Red color has been used by humans as far back as 100,000 years ago in South Africa, and is commonly believed to represent blood as a symbol of death, but also of life. As I've already touched on, Gimbutas believed that for some ancient cultures, red color emphasized the life-giving and the life-taking power of women's menstrual blood and post-birth fluids. In essence, I believe that this red symbolism in the story attributed to Jesus's resurrection likely originated with what may have been considered women's magical powers to create new life and bleed without dying. And I'd also like to note, it was always Mary Magdalene who held that egg in her hand in this story, perhaps to suggest that Jesus's ability to resurrect actually had something to do with her. And the last symbol, the downward facing triangle, which you can see here as her pubic triangle. This is it's a Near Eastern goddess, sometimes attributed to Ishtar. So the downward facing triangle is an ancient symbol for woman and vulva, arguably dating back to the Paleolithic. In Mesopotamia, it literally signified a woman's power. I painted the triangle onto the egg and with my menstrual blood. It was essential that I combine three elements, the egg, menstrual blood, and the downward facing triangle to affirm feminine symbolism in this story. So finally, I centered our woman of the day, Mary Magdalene, as the protagonist, not the messenger. I see this story as her ability to resurrect herself and all women from the shadow of harmful narratives about us, particularly our bodies. So in my version of this story, Mary Magdalene speaks from the Gnostic text, the thunder, perfect mind. This text beautifully expresses the two extremes women are expected to embody in our culture, with lines like, I am the whore and the holy woman. I am she who is honored and she who is mocked. Okay, so I'm going to play the video. It's about 2.5 minutes here. Okay. So to end this performance commentary, I believe that the true meaning of Easter is a celebration of the feminine power to regenerate new life out of death. And this was originally a power attributed to goddesses and also to women. Oops. Embodiment, a radical act of healing. So each ritual performance piece presents another opportunity to reclaim female power. The use of menstrual blood has proved vital. As I mentioned earlier, menstrual blood has long been considered mostly problematic in Western culture as a symbol of impurity or dirt or danger. Because I believe I have internalized this message, I have come to feel alienated or a stranger in my body, and that my body is doing something wrong, shameful, or problematic. Instead, using blood in a public performance challenges the cultural preference that menstrual blood remain hidden and out of sight. The work with menstrual blood is uncomfortable, and I still find talking about it makes me uneasy. And this is exactly why I keep talking about it. To normalize talking about something that is a natural function of the female body, and in essence, is part of a biological system. It's part of a biological system that makes new life possible. The human race is able to continue because women bleed. Today, as ever before, feminist scholarship is needed to uncover and challenge old and current limited beliefs about women and femininity. The application of a feminist usable past is an important tool for women and for men to heal the psychological wounds from such beliefs. Feminism can then be seen not only as a theoretical tool or social movement, but also as a healing modality for the soul. For myself, an embodied and theoretical feminist approach has galvanized me into taking the necessary outer and inner actions toward this healing, and serves as a reflection of my personal mission to reclaim Mary Magdalene and female embodiment as sacred. So in conclusion, moving the mythic Mary Magdalene forward, I will end as I began. Mary Magdalene is polyvalent for those of us who are willing to engage with her as an archetypal figure. Archetypically, she holds the roles of priestess, mother, lover, tantric partner, wife, spiritual leader, contemplative, and teacher. She is an every woman. Truly, I believe that the Magdalene comes to each of us in an image that most resonates with our deepest longings, desires, and needs through the collective yearning for images of the whole woman. That is, or what Jungian Esther Harding terms a woman who is one in herself. That is, an independent woman who is not defined by her relationship to a man, whether that be father, brother, husband, son, or lover. She is whole and worthy in and of herself. This is the Mary of Magdala who is rising in the culture today, complex and nuanced, relational, yet independent and free. So in the words of my colleague, Dr. April Heaslip, Ave Magdalena. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Annalisa.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. So we've got time for discussion and any comments. I couldn't hear during the performance with the red egg outside the Vatican. You showed us the video. Was there any talking accompanying that? We couldn't hear any sound.
Oh, you couldn't hear me singing or talking?
No, I couldn't.
Oh.
Could anyone else? Could anyone else? Maybe you could replay that video with the
Sure.
With the
Yeah,
sound.
that's really unfortunate. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, let's see if I can do that again. Oops.
Have to share sound or something.
Okay, can you hear it now?
Nothing.
No.
No?
No. check on share sound.
Okay, oops. Sharing has stopped as the sharing window is closed. Oops, sorry. I'm new to this. Share, share sound. You are sharing, share screen. Okay. I don't know why it's not, because I can hear it. So that's weird to me that you all can't hear it. Well, I also, it's on my YouTube channel, so I can link you to that if we can't figure this out, because I'd hate to, that's really unfortunate though.
But you're singing whilst this is going on, right?
So I open it with a song about Mary. I just claim myself as Mary Magdalene. And then I speak maybe like 10 lines from that Gnostic text. I am the first, I am the last. I am she who is honored and she who is mocked. I am the virgin and the holy woman. I am the mother and the daughter. So it's this constant, I'm humiliation and pride, things like that. And so it's this constant tension of opposites that I feel that women are expected to embody in this culture, in Western culture. Probably not limited to Western culture, but, and I definitely feel like Mary Magdalene has been all of those things that has been projected onto her. So that is why I decided to put those words in her mouth. Yeah, and I also performed the text in English and Italian. It felt appropriate for the location.
Great.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay,
Yeah.
so who's got a question for Annalisa? She's given us an overview of her work. There's so many, issues arising that we could take it from there. Who would like to go first? Just unmute yourself.
Hello, my name is Annie Waters. I live in California. Hello, Annalisa.
Hi,
really
Annie.
Of your work. I'm also a performance artist, and I put in the chat that I wanted to introduce you to some other performance artists here on the West Coast that would really appreciate your work. And so afterwards, do that. And I just want to mention also, if you're familiar with Andrew Harvey, he's actually doing a course right now on the Shift Network, and he speaks amazingly positively about women's bodies and the re-embodiment of the feminine through Magdalene. So I think you would find a connectivity with him. I wanted to share that.
Oh, thank you so much. I will definitely check him out. Andrew Sullivan?
Andrew Harvey.
Harvey. Sorry. Harvey.
Yeah,
I do.
The Shift Network is, I'll send you an email with that. I'll forward that as Thomas gave me an email for that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
What's your performance work like, Anne? What do you, is it similar?
No, it is and it isn't. I've done, first of all, I've written probably 50 different ritual theater pieces. I'm 70 something, we'll just say, and over the course of the last number of decades. And I've been doing this since I was very young, and was also called Through Menstrual Blood, actually, to several of my pieces, but they weren't front and center. So I really honor you for putting that right out there.
Thank you.
But transformation of our time, I did a major piece called The Awakening with 22 very large full-face goddess masks. And the people who embodied those energetics, those archetypes, wore the masks and danced the part of the ocean dying, or a glacier melting, or the sadness of our time with the drought. But then we brought into it, and we also brought into it the GMO seeds and the destruction of agriculture, all through dance and poet theater, using the Greek chorus as the way to deal with training dancers that don't have to speak. She can't speak in these masks also. They're full face masks. But the end was the beneficent feminine coming in to reaffirm and remythologize for our future, for the future we really want. So we showed the destruction and the extinctions of the animals, and then we brought in the beauty and the potential for the future. So it was a very powerful performance. I have a really bad video of it because it was just done, as you know, in situ in a theater. You never get a good video unless you light for it. Anyway, it was a wonderful piece. It's probably my masterpiece. And those masks are amazing. They're not made by me. They're made by an artist called Lauren Rain, who has, she's an amazing mythologist, and you would also love her work as well.
Yes.
And her name, Lauren Rain with an E, R-A-I-N-E, you could look her up. And I could also send you a link to her Spider Woman blog, where many of her wisdom sayings reside. So I think you would just totally connect with her.
Yeah, I've seen her work. She makes beautiful, incredible masks.
Well, she made these masks for the performance. So
Wow.
we were on fire, and she was making like a mask in a day. It was very powerful. The hair on my arms just lifts up as I speak of it. 2013, and we were just on fire for this work because we felt we were at this peak point in time to change the nature of the world's imaging of the future. We want to, we need an image of the future visioning that is not dystopian. So much of the media and the art that came through, is dystopian, and that's just kind of covering over the possibility of the ecotopia and the fifth sacred thing by Starhawk, and the ways we can reimagine our future to survive and thrive on this planet, which is at this moment, absolute turning point moment, as Thomas has said. So anyway, if you already know Lauren Rain's work, then please enjoy.
Yeah, but I'm happy to have your recommendation too. I look forward to connecting more over this too in the future.
Yeah, I would love to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Our name, for one thing, yes?
Yes, exactly.
Anna, Danu, Anuket, so many Annas, Inanna. I mean, it's all there.
I know. I had a powerful experience with Inanna around that same kind of messaging once too. So I feel like that, the kind of core name Anna is very primordial. It's very ancient.
Yeah, we are lucky that way.
Yeah.
Work with that.
Yes, we are.
Let me just add, as a druid, that in Ireland, Anu is the mother goddess.
Right.
Tuatha De Danann. She's the goddess of the Celts as well. And the word Danube, which is the greatest river in Europe, the Danube is named after her. And people think that the Anna of Mesopotamia and Inanna is the same, actually, as Dana of the Celts. So the Druids were the link for the mother goddess. Can I just also say something about Annalisa's work that I've discovered doing a bit of research, which is I saw a performance Annalisa did at Delphi. I think I'm right in saying she was actually in Delphi, which is to me one of the holiest places on earth. It's where the Omphalos is, and it's where the Pythoness was, who foretells the future. And it was a sacred prophet site for 800 years, run by women, right? So if you're going to reclaim, now this is a big discussion, but was Mary Magdalene some kind of a prophetess? Perhaps. Discuss, what do we mean by a prophetess? And I think there's wonderful work to be done. If you women could go to all the goddess prophet oracle sites. I've got a book of sacred oracles of Europe, and the Middle East. I once had a dream where I met Apollo in the dream. It was one of those waking real dreams, right? And it's a long, I won't go into the whole thing, but Apollo basically gave me the mission. He said, Thomas, you've got to get all my oracle sites going again, because Apollo is the god of prophecy. And he wants them all rebuilt and reworked and staffed with priests and priestesses. So anyway, tell us about your work at Delphi. What was it like? Because it was I've seen the clip and it's amazing.
Thank you. It was, I mean, listen, I kind of am open to the call of the goddess. So I had no intention to do anything necessarily until I got to Grace and she spoke. Gaia was like, you will do a performance in my honor at Delphi.
Can I ask you, Annalisa, to get rid of the screen sharing so we could see your beautiful
Oh,
face?
yes. Oh, yes. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
There we go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I didn't go with the intention of performing, and then I got there and it was very clear. So I got there with all my materials. I had planned to actually do the performance in front of the temple of Athena, which is across from the temple of Apollo complex. And I got kicked out, and which I can understand from their perspective. They don't know me or what I'm doing. I didn't get permission to be there. And but as I turned to leave, there was this cat sitting on some of the ruins there, and there's cats everywhere in the ruins. That's pretty standard, but I never saw them interact with people. And so it was about as far away from me as I am from my computer right now. And it was dead eye looking in my eyes, meowing, meow, 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 meow. And I was like, oh my God, it's the goddess. She's telling me to keep going. I won't let them stop me. And so anyway, I found a place to do this, and it was pretty profound. Like, the whole idea that I learned from one of my teachers and mentors is that site, before it was taken over by the Indo-European tribes that worshipped Apollo, it was a site dedicated to Gaia, and probably a dream inculcation. And so in the mythologies, in the Homeric hymn, for example, there's the mythology of Apollo conquering this site and killing Gaia's sacred python. So kind of my purpose was to reclaim this site as Gaia's sacred site, as one of her original oracles, and this timeless figure. And so not to hate on Apollo, but to also kind of bring Gaia back. Remember the importance of Gaia, because she is the first and the last. That's what the hymns tell us. The first, not the last, but she is the first, the oldest of all beings. Actually, she probably will be the last too. Let's just be real about that.
Yes, outlive us all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to say something, since you're on the subject of Gaia, I'm also a playwright, just to let you know.
Oh,
and I've written a play which is a pagan version of the medieval mystery dramas. You know, the medieval mystery dramas were about the creation, the incarnation, and then the last judgment. They were like the whole of the cosmos in Christian theurgy, and they were done on the backs of carts outside York Cathedral or wherever, you know. So I've done a pagan version, and it stars Dionysus and Gaia. So I won't say anymore. I'll send you a copy of it, and
Yes.
I still think this. Yeah, I'll send you a copy of it. If you're a fan of Gaia, you will like the play. And it's a sacred drama. It's like, yeah, I won't say any more. Just
it's been produced. It's been performed.
No, I'm still waiting for the right moment. It's a play to stop the end of the world.
Oh. We need it now.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Don't wait.
We need it now for sure.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I've been waiting for this moment. Yeah. Hang on. Keep talking among yourselves. Somebody ask Annalisa another question. I've got a guest here. Bonjour.
And what part of California do you live in?
I live in Mendocino County in Northern California, 3 hours north of San Francisco, in the Redwoods. It's a beautiful rural village, and we are localizing our food systems and creating community infrastructure to see ourselves as social connectors in this time. So it's been wonderful. It's been difficult in this, separation, the isolation that we're we're currently involved in is so ironic in this time when we need more than ever to be meeting and holding each other. So
Yeah.
I'm channeling a lot of grief and sadness over our situation. I know that you, living in an urban area, have even other layers of, things are tearing apart, and that is good to rebuild with the strength of the youth, such as yourself, to bring forward, the new mythology, the opportunities to rebuild after the destruction here.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Yeah. I can't wait for the regenerative piece.
Yeah. Really.
Yeah.
Every day
Regeneration.
I'm in my garden, I'm an herbalist, so that I rebuild myself. The rebuilding of yourself is so important. As you said, I really love that your rituals are very personalized. I haven't thought of that as a public performance. I do my own private work, but to bring it to the public, it makes it so personal for every woman and man to see you be vulnerable and totally present and embodied in yourself. It's very, very, very powerful. And I thank you for doing that.
Thank you for saying that. That means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
We had another question from Trisha. I don't know if she wants to ask it in person. Trisha, are you still there? If you want to unmute.
Okay, yes, I just unmuted. Hello, yes, thank you for the talk. I was curious on your view of the role of pilgrimage these days in reclaiming the sacred feminine, given the strong Christian traditions underlying pilgrimage. How do you see that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. The first thing that popped into my mind is that I'm just kind of a rule breaker anyway. So I just kind of follow my own bliss. And I think that, the Christianness of it, has its purpose and it has its place. And I actually learned a lot when I went to La Sainte Baume, and I met a lot of people who are ardent believers in the Christian faith. And I actually found that it enriched my view and understanding of Mary Magdalene, even if I didn't believe in Christianity in the same way that they did, or Christ and Mary Magdalene. So I think that is actually really enriching to keep going on pilgrimage, and that the Christianness of it does serve a purpose. And I think hopefully that those of us that want to go on pilgrimage who are not Christian, or maybe have our own differing views on Christianity, can also enrich the Christian perspective. I also had a great talk with the Dominican friar at La Sainte Baume, and we were talking about why people go to La Sainte Baume, and he was like, some people come for this, that, or because of the sacred feminine. And I said something about God, and he said, but what is God? And I said, love. And he said, well, that is a thing to meditate on, the meaning of love. So I think both perspectives enrich one another. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
I'll just add one thing, if I can.
Please.
For those that don't know this, I run also a pagan academic network for Europe. It's called PAEN, Pagan Academic European Network, and we had an online conference like this a couple of years ago, and I gave a lecture on paganism in European history and pilgrimage. So what were the pagan pilgrimages of Europe before Christianity? And I went right back to Stonehenge and Neolithic sites. We know that Europe was full of these Neolithic pilgrimage sites. And on a lot of them, later Christian pilgrimage sites have been built. But I think pilgrimage is a prehistoric pagan phenomena. It's been going on not just in Europe, but in the Middle East and among the American Indian peoples of North America. Every culture has its sacred sites where it would go at special times of the year, often coinciding with the solstice, the equinox and stuff. We just did this for midsummer solstice. We had a 24-hour conference for the midsummer solstice over Stonehenge, because I chair the Stonehenge Truth and Reconciliation Commission as a Druid, because there's been a lot of politics. Are Druids allowed to go there at summer solstice? Are they not? It's been a battlefield over the last 20 years. And we had a guy come on from South Africa called Dean Liprini, who's working with sacred sites in South Africa. There's a mountain outside Cape Town. He reckons he's got proof that they've been doing sacred pilgrimage there for 40,000 years.
Wow.
And in the oldest cave in the world with continual religious pilgrimage is just near there in South Africa. Norwegian archaeologists found arrowheads, ochre red, painted red, which is going back to your menstrual blood theme of the sacred red, from 70,000 years ago, right down to now. And there's a python, the snake, is carved on the rock of this cave in South Africa. Dean Liprini's one of the people he's writing about this, and he's actually trying to reactivate these sacred sites for pilgrimages. He's taking kids out of the ghetto of South African cities, where a lot of them turn to drugs and crime and, you know, whatever, and get guns and all the rest of it. By taking them out into nature to these sacred sites, it totally transforms them. They don't want to do that anymore. They want to get back to the goddess, if you want. So, you know, there's people, the more we can reactivate these sites, and there's there's one just near me. There's a Druid Hill in Gaul here, in central Gaul, just like 10 miles away. And there'll be one near you. So look out for your sacred sites in your landscape. And I think you'll find Mary Magdalene or some local goddess will be there smiling when you get there, you know.
Yeah. Yes, I love it.
Yeah, for Annalisa, the Inuit culture is so much more organized in terms of understanding their mythologies and their symbologies, whereas the Pomo Indians here in Northern California didn't leave much record, and the baskets and things they made weren't, there are some petroglyphs, I take that back, very few petroglyphs on top of one mountain. Maybe that is an ancient sacred site. I hadn't thought of that. It's a beautiful place. I want to speak to the caves because a woman named Kayleen Asbo, who's a Mary Magdalene mythologist.
Yeah, she attended Pacifica.
Yeah,
I know her, yes.
I know her. She just did a tour of France, a virtual tour of France, because she can't take people this year. And we talked about caves quite a bit, and she showed a lot of cave paintings. And as Thomas reminded us, the red color, the red ochre. And they know that the handprints now are mostly women and children. It was almost all a female pilgrimage into those caves, you know, in the Neolithic times. And Cosquer, the cave outside Marseille, is so perfect because it never had any oxygen. I don't know if you're aware of that one. You can't really dive to it. It's a dive, you have to dive. But so on about the caves, I'm just fascinated by the idea of the ancient caves being pilgrimage sites, as Thomas is reminding us. And have you gone to some of the caves on your journeys to France and Spain?
No, not some of the major caves that you're talking about, but I just, you know, I think again, like it's that whole idea, the ritual of death and rebirth that you get to experience in the tomb, womb tomb of the cave, that that's probably the primary reason why it is so primary, because it's our primary experience. That's our beginning and our ending. And I didn't know that about the hands being female and children, but for some reason that makes a lot of sense. I know too that forever the theory has been that these caves display elaborate hunting scenes, and now there's some talk about them being shamanistic or maybe shamanistic hunting scenes. But I keep coming across articles that are even trying to counter some of those narratives. So I think there is kind of a divine feminine thread that's starting to make its way through research on these caves and the red ochre and the paintings.
And there are there are ancient Neolithic, Venus of Willendorf type little
Yes.
pieces found in some of them, especially near toward the border of Italy, the caves that are further east. So she's done some research on it, and she claims to want to do more. And I guess if she hasn't done enough, then we haven't either. So.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to tell you, I don't know if you want to hear from me because I'm not, this is your time, Annalisa, but I have another goddess pilgrimage cave experience that was a ritual theater piece, just quickly to tell you. The Eleusinian Mystery, which I know you're very familiar with, we reenacted that a number of years in the caves in Pinnacles National Monument here in California. And the first time we did it, I was chosen to play the part of Persephone. And it was a very sexually healing experience for me because I'll admit, my first sexual experience was a rape. And being taken by Hades down, literally, visibly, and he was a friend, luckily an older man. He grabbed me out of the crowd of us milling about in the upper world, and we went down through an opening down, and as we passed through what was going to be the Demeter temple, they were setting it up still in one of the larger upper caves. They had forgotten an altar cloth for the altar, and I took off my green robe and gave it to them as the altar for the Demeter temple. And I went into the underworld naked with Hades, and he gave me his red and black cloak to wear. And we spent the whole night down in the lower cave receiving pilgrims who came with their one stalk of wheat from the upper world and their burning question about their life. And it was an incredibly powerful, life-changing experience for me, embodying Persephone. And we could talk about that sometime, you and I.
Yeah, I would love to hear more. That sounds incredible.
Yeah, that was quite a while ago. That was like 1991.
Wow.
Gosh. Okay. Look, I'm sorry to butt in, but we ought to move on because time is pressing. We have our ending ritual. And before that, I'm supposed to do my talk. And I've prepared some interesting, yummy stuff. So I hope that you will enjoy this little and I just want to thank Annalisa again for your brilliant contribution. I hope you'll stick around and listen to my, what I'm going to do is an overview of themes. So I've prepared about 20 themes, which I think come up with Mary Magdalene Studies, right? And you can probably think of others, and some others have come up during this discussion. But this is an overview of the ones I've got to offer. So this is like a menu, and it's not an exhaustive, I can't, within the time limit, I couldn't do that. But let me take you through, and I hope you'll find something interesting. And if there's time for discussion afterwards, you can contribute your own thoughts. So the first theme I want to mention is, in relation to Mary Magdalene Studies, is there's a whole new field among religious studies scholars called esoteric history, the study of esoteric religions. Now, there's a professor at the University of Amsterdam, Wouter Hanegraaff, who's professor of esoteric religious studies there. And he set up a thing called the European Society for the Study of Western Esotericism, which has had a series of conferences. They had one in 2019 on visions, voices, and altered states. He's just written a paper about the right of the Santo Daime community to use their ayahuasca in ceremony in Holland, because the Dutch government is trying to forbid this. And he's saying, no, as a scholar of religions, it's legitimate. American Indians can use peyote. Why can't they use ayahuasca in Holland? So it's a big issue now. A question mark, I have a book called Gnostic Visions about the use of psychedelics by Jesus and the Merry Crew, Mary Magdalene. He argues that some of the Gnostic texts indicate that these guys were visioning using something. We could discuss that. That's a whole other field of research. These people doing esoteric religious studies are, working on that. Even in Russia, they're doing this now. There's a conference coming up on mystic and esoteric movements in images, symbols, and signs in mysticism and esotericism, December this year, 2020. And of all places, it's in Novgorod, which was the original home of the Russian northern people. That would be an amazing conference to go to. And I'm sure that if you wanted to go and do a paper on Mary Magdalene, you know, they would love it. So that's one theme. It's a huge theme. To my knowledge, there's also the Center of the Study of New Religions in Italy, which does these kind of esoteric things. And it's very exciting what they're doing. And I just want to mention, in case you don't know, I published a book this year called The Handbook of Magical Peacemaking, Theory and Practice. Now, I'm the first guy, I don't understand why I'm the first guy to do this, but I've linked peace studies and conflict theory, conflict resolution theory, and mediation with magic. There's a huge number of books on magic, magical, you know, rituals, ceremony, and all that. And then there's a huge academic field of peace studies and conflict resolution. But I'm the first guy to say, let's get the two in conversation. If we don't start making peace as magically exciting as war, then we're doomed on the planet. Because warriors are mostly magicians. People like Steve Bannon, these psycho warriors, they're all doing internet attacks on Russia, and you know, we don't know what they're up to, dark artists. We have to convert these warriors into peace workers. So that's what my book is on. It's sort of esoteric peacemaking. Okay, the next theme I want to mention is heresy studies. Heresy. Because of course, now this is really dangerous. If I call any of you a heretic and I'm the Inquisition, you won't last long. Or if you call me a heretic, you know. So in the Cathar times, the Dominicans used Mary Magdalene as a symbol of their orthodoxy. Now, this is a weird paradox. They were using her to hunt out Cathars. Well, I think that's shameful. But so we need to study what is heresy. Are we trying to invert 2,000 years of Christian orthodoxy? Does Mary Magdalene insist that we say to these Orthodox Catholic official religious theologians, you're the heretics and we're actually the Orthodox? You know, let's have a conversation about this. If we're going to invert everything and turn it upside down, I would like to mediate that conversation. I don't want us to end up with an inversion of heresy whereby everybody that's Orthodox becomes called a heretic and vice versa. We need some middle ground, right? Peacemaking. So there's a thing called the International Society for Heresy Studies. Would you believe it? And they have a journal of heresy studies. I think we should do a peace deal with them and have a Mary Magdalene issue. Like, you know, what is heresy when it comes to Mary Magdalene? And I'll come back to that a bit later. And that's linked to the question of blasphemy. You know, what is blasphemy? And that's relating to some of the points Annalisa's made about women's bodies. I mean, men have a terror of the female sexuality. So we'll come to that. But the other question related to heresy study is witchcraft studies. Because if you know, the male doesn't like the female because she's too, whatever, unchaste, wild, she's running in the woods with Dionysus. So the solution is inquisite them and then burn them, you know. Well, that's a very primitive kind of mentality. As a bloke, I'm ashamed of that, obviously. But I think we have to analyze it psychologically. What is going on there, you know? Because it's interesting, the very first suppression for heresy took place in the Pyrenees. There were witches in the Pyrenees around the time, soon after the Cathars had been finished off with. Then they got hold of witches, you know. It's as if every society needs its heretics. I'm reading a biography of Stalin, and he was hunting Trotskyites. The Great Purge, millions of people died because they were connected with Trotsky. And often he was going for women, loose women, wives of Bolsheviks, mistresses, and if you were thought to be slightly loose in your morals, you were purged by Stalin, who was very conservative in his sexuality. So there's a whole psycho history of you know, terror, actually. Next, I want to mention Gnosticism as another theme. Gnosticism studies, very interesting field, which is closely overlapping with Mary Magdalene's studies. There's a professor in Finland called Antti Marjanen, who's written an amazing text called The Woman Jesus Loved, Mary Magdalene in the Nag Hammadi Library and Related Documents, published by the wonderful Dutch publisher Brill in Leiden. And he's gone through all the Nag Hammadi texts, all the Gospel of Thomas and all the others, and all the other apocryphal writings which mention Mary Magdalene, and he's analyzed them all with a fine-tooth comb. What do they tell us about the people that wrote it? What do they tell us about Mary Magdalene herself? You know, as far as we can reconstruct. Now, he's even gone to Mani's writings. Mani was a Gnostic from about the 200s AD, who lived in the Mesopotamia region. He was part Persian or Parthian and part Semitic. And he integrated all the kind of esoteric spirituality of his day. And he knew about Mary Magdalene. That's very interesting. And in his hymn book, he mentions Mary Magdalene, right? So this guy, this professor, he's a professor of Gnostic studies in Finland. He goes and analyzes Mani's hymn book, which is pretty interesting stuff. The Manichaean Christians were found as far away as China. Mani believed that each of us in incarnation has a twin soul that is not fully incarnated. So everyone here on this Zoom chat, we have a twin soul that's sort of hovering above us somewhere. Like we would say our guardian angel or something. He had some wacky ideas which ended up really in the Pyrenees in the form of the Cathar tradition. So the Cathar tradition is Mani's teachings transmuted over time. So it's interesting that Mani knew about Mary Magdalene. There's a lot of mysteries to discover there that we're just at the beginning of. One of Antti students called Carrie Forsberg has done a study of Mary Magdalene through a Gnostic lens. And she is looking at, you know, taking on from Antti's work, like, well, what is the Gnostic Mary Magdalene? You know, how do we know, kind of thing. And there's lots, I think there's a lot still to be studied and found out. Then we've got Cathar studies as a separate field in its own right, okay? And it's not as advanced as I would like, okay? When I went down to the Pyrenees, we've had a couple of conferences down there so far. Hopefully we'll have another in October. But as yet, there is no handbook for all the Cathar library resources in France or internationally. I want to work with scholars to find out which libraries like Toulouse, Foix, other parts of France have collections of Cathar books, monographs, manuscripts. I mean, I know the Vatican has a few because some of the texts of the Inquisition ended up in the Vatican. And you probably know the famous book Montaillou, which is the study of the Inquisition in a particular village called Montaillou. The reason that was surviving is because the bishop of Pamiers at the time became the Pope, and he took all the archives of the Inquisition when he went to Avignon as Pope. And then they ended up in the Vatican Library. So, you know, who has done the research on all the Cathar holdings in all the different libraries of Europe? Nobody. Why not? Well, I guess, you know, we can guess at that, but I think it should be done. It would be interesting. Okay, the next theme, that's one theme, right? And also some private collections. So when I'm talking to people in the Pyrenees region, they say, oh yeah, well, do you know such and such? He's got a huge private collection. Do you know such and such? People have been doing this research since the 19th century. And there's huge private libraries assembled. Well, somebody ought to go around and knock on the doors and say, can I come and catalogue your library? You know, that would be really exciting research. And there's just, for instance, there's a manuscript just surfaced claiming to be, you know, a Gospel of Mary Magdalene that was handed down by Cathar families in secret, just been published. So is it authentic? Isn't it? We don't know. Let's find out. Let's do some research. Okay, next topic, next theme. Well, we've been doing it. Annalisa and others have introduced it, which is the whole question of feminist theology. I mean, I personally, my own journey as I was living in Canada as a sort of Quaker, and then I hit London and discovered the occult bookshops and became a goddess worshipper in the 80s, right? And I remember discovering Merlin Stone's book, The Paradise Paper, which some of you may know, which made me look at biblical studies, you know, in a totally different way. I think it's possible to do Christian theology, but from a totally different goddess perspective than what we've been taught. So I regard the feminist theologians as, you know, amazing pioneers, each in their own right. And there's a huge field of work. There's been a recent study by Mary Ann Beavis, The Deification of Mary Magdalene, which looks somewhat critically, but in a scholarly way, at Margaret Starbird's work, who we heard from earlier on film. And, you know, what she calls the divinization of Mary Magdalene. These people say, okay, so it's like a faith. It may not actually be true, but it's a thing that's taking off. Now, Annalisa would probably say, well, it doesn't matter if it's true or not, it's archetypally powerful. Well, as a historian, I want to also know if it's true. You see, I think because there's different levels of truth. I mean, it's like the whole Gospels. One of our speakers earlier from the Pyrenees said, well, the whole thing may be just made up. Maybe there was no Jesus, no Mary Magdalene at all. They're not historical, and it doesn't matter. Well, okay, I think it does matter. And because I'm a historian, I want to know the historical truth. Anyway, this woman, Mary Ann Beavis, has gone into that. There's a whole bunch of, you know, fascinating feminist theologians. I can't do justice to it all, writing on Mary Magdalene. And, you know, you will know all the different names. And some are looking at her as like a guardian of the archetypal goddess of the collective unconscious of you know, Christian culture. So there's huge things to talk about there. I'm just saying it's a theme, right? Each of these themes would take a whole day to discuss fully. Now there's another theme which is interesting, and this is the whole question of sex magic and eros. Mary Magdalene is a guardian of sex magic, the Gnostic liturgy of sex as ritual. And there's a huge literature beginning to emerge. I mentioned Wouter Hanegraaff, the professor of esoteric studies. He's edited a volume called Hidden Intercourse, Eros and Sexuality in the History of Western Esotericism, published a few years ago now, with Jeffrey Krippel, who's an American professor of history of religions, who's written a great study of Esalen. And the two of them got these papers together of obscure thinkers in the history of Western esotericism. We all know Aleister Crowley was advocating sexuality as a sacrament, but in a somewhat weird way, just to put it, you know, mildly. These guys have dug up some amazing women. There was a woman in Paris, in the Café Society of Paris in the 1930s, who proclaimed that she had all this sort of esoteric, you know, wisdom, and she was teaching people sex magic. And anybody who was anybody had a session with her, like learning, you know. and she set up a sort of esoteric occult church. And this volume goes into all that stuff. Now, as an example of the most recent literature, there's a chap called Tom Kenyon and his partner, Judy Kenyon, have written a book called The Magdalene Manuscript, The Alchemies of Horus and Sex Magic of Isis. And they are an amazing couple. I don't know, I've not met them, but they argue that in the beginning, Mary Magdalene was an initiate of the Temple of Isis, and that basically she was an initiate of, I mean, Annalisa touched on it when she talked about prostitution, but and she mentioned the idea of the prostitute as the holy cult, so, but didn't go into it in depth. What these people are arguing is that authentic prostitution wasn't about like sex and money. It's about the initiatory experience of mind-blowing erotic initiation, which was in the hands of the priestesses and to some extent the priests, in the temples of Aphrodite and temples scattered throughout the Middle East and Europe, dedicated to those mysteries. So they were the, if you want, the sex therapists of the ancient world. But they would teach you the inner aspects of eros and sexual experience. Now, what's incredible is this guy, Tom Kenyon, and his partner have been channeling, or this is what they claim, Mary Magdalene's teachings about this. And they've published this manuscript explaining what is, mind-blowing erotic sex and how to do it. And it doesn't have much to do with the body. I mean, the body's a vehicle for it, but it's about a transportation of spirit, which fits in very much with what the tantric teachings are saying from India. So I think we have to just put a big question mark on this theme and say, is this possibly true? Were Jesus and Mary Magdalene practicing these high esoteric, erotic mysteries? Question mark. And what's the evidence? Obviously, to a scholar based on empirical research, channelings from Judy Kenyon are not going to be sufficient to persuade mainstream academia that this is the case, that we've cracked the mystery of Mary Magdalene. We can't announce to the Times newspaper of London, Mary Magdalene conference, we cracked the mystery, they were doing sex magic. That's not enough. We need some real evidence. So I would like us to think, well, what would that evidence be like? What do we have to find to prove that that's what they were doing? And anyway, there's a whole literature around this. It's very interesting. And one of our speakers earlier today, Anaya Sophia, who gave us a delightful earlier lecture, she's also opening the same cupboard. She's written a book about the holy mysteries of sexuality and eros and sacred relationship and womb wisdom, as she calls it. So I think the reclaiming of sacred sexuality is part of the ending of violent sexuality, rape. You talked, Anne, tragically of that, and the Persephone myth. And, males need to understand what is eros and how that power should be used together, not against, the woman and so on. So that's really quite important, that leads me on to my next theme, which is liberation theology. There is a whole literature of discovering Mary Magdalene as a spokeswoman for liberation theology. Now, this is the theology for the poor. I had a brilliant interaction with a woman called Reverend Liz Theo Harris, who I'm absolutely in love with, who's the vice chair or the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. They just had a digital march on Washington, 1 million people. And she spoke at a conference I organized. She's saying that Americans are sick of this, like 1% own all the money and the wealth and the weapons, and 99% like are poor and they're starting to have to live on the streets, And this is America, the supposedly richest country on the planet. Well, it's happening everywhere. It's happening in, across the planet. And this COVID thing has brought it all home. Well, we have to get some liberation going, okay? And I think Mary Magdalene is part of that, reclaiming her as a liberation theologian. And I found an amazing article. Well, it's a book, Liberation Theology and Sexuality, by Marcella Althaus-Reid of University of Edinburgh. And it's going for it because liberation theology is normally about poverty versus wealth. That's important. But the political economy of sex is part of the thing we have to be liberated from. There's a beautiful essay in that called "The Prostitutes Also Go Into the Kingdom of God." And it's a reading of Mary Magdalene by a guy called Hugo Cordova Quero. And, you know, he's quoting from the Gospel of St. Matthew, when Jesus is being attacked by officialdom sent from Jerusalem, and they're all trying to make points and defeat him, you know. And he says, look, for God's sake, you've missed the whole plot. I tell you, prostitutes are going to go into the kingdom of God before you guys. Well, that's radical stuff. If you just think about that, that is radical stuff. And so these people are working on that. There's also an Arab Palestinian Christian liberation theology, which I've encountered in Jerusalem and in Bethlehem, which is not well known in Europe. Or most people think liberation theology is like Brazil and Latin America. No, it's also in the Arab world. And we should not forget that the Christians of Palestine are the literal descendants of Mary Magdalene and Jesus. They're, you know, if there's any descendants of theirs running around, they'll be living in Bethlehem and in Jericho and those places. And I've met them. Some of them are doing liberation theology, profound stuff, and so we should be aware of it. One of the slogans that they have is "No one is liberated until everyone is liberated." You know, I think somebody in this day's talks already kind of hinted at that. To me, it's as if we're all roped together climbing up the mountain of truth, and if anyone falls, we all catch you. You know, that surely was the point of Mary Magdalene and Christ's teachings. Nobody should be left behind here. Okay, I want to move on. There's another topic, which is, yeah, these are themes. And this is, well, I call it the aliens' New Age theology. The aliens are coming to rescue us. They're going to land in spaceships. And Mary Magdalene and Jesus were from other planets. Now, you know, there's a huge industry in this regard. It's not just Bugarach that has alien spaceships landing on. It seems to me most of Hawaii and a lot of the States has people that advocate this kind of theology. But it's a problem. There's a problematic involved in that it can degenerate into a sort of Gnostic battle between good aliens versus bad aliens. And we've all seen on the internet, you can fall down the rabbit hole of my alien crew are better than yours and we're going to zap you. And it's just a sort of war games going on. It's the colonization of the mental sphere of alien you know, mind space with exporting our war games. Well, I don't want that. I always say I'm happy to run the first interplanetary seminar for peace, but I'm not going to do Star Wars zapping. And I certainly don't want Mary Magdalene to come down in the spaceship and zap everyone. And I have encountered people, I mentioned this earlier, who have that theology. You know, the revengeful Christ God is going to come down and kill everyone on the planet, apart from 144,000 who will be saved. And that's because we're also sinful and we're evil. And Mary Magdalene is going to be there, sort of righteously smug, rescuing a handful, and the rest are going to be all zapped. Well, to me, this is a false Gnostic dualism. And I think it needs calling out and exposing. And if some people have that image of Mary Magdalene, they need to be called on it. Well, some people do, I assure you. If you scratch away behind Mary Magdalene channeling types, some of them have that kind of view. So it's slightly worrying. And then there's another whole literature which is interesting, another theme. I don't have time to do justice to it. And this is the green Mary Magdalene. Now, I like her because I run the Global Green University and I'm an eco-philosopher, and I've studied with eco-philosophers for many years. And one of the things I like about Jesus and Mary Magdalene is they were country dwellers. I know that she hung around Magdala and was quite sophisticated, but a lot of the images they draw on are quite rural. Christ is always talking about the flowers of the valley. Nothing is more beautiful than a lily or a flower. He's a simple country chap who sees nature as divine. And I'm sure Mary Magdalene, you know, was of the same kind. They would be entranced in nature. It was so beautiful to hear from Lena earlier. In nature, like I can believe that Mary Magdalene ended up in that beautiful cave, that part of the world. It's so gorgeous. If I got there, I wouldn't want to move. So the greening of Mary Magdalene and Christ as a mission for sort of eco-spirituality that is not about blowing up the world, slaughtering the sinners, killing off the evil ones, and then the few saved ones go back to their home planet on spaceships. To me, that's a ridiculous, dualistic, false teaching. What I want is a theology that saves this planet, that saves the forests, that saves the animals, that cleanses the oceans, that restores the Sea of Galilee, which is having some ecological problems of its own. I've visited there a couple of times and they have problems, you know, and that we can transform our military agenda to what's called a Green New Deal. But I don't want a Green New Deal. I want the Green Old Deal that is called humanity. We started out in nature, you know, living in caves, and just, we love nature. We are from nature. And I think that the Jesus story was about let's be in love with nature again and each other's nature. So sacred sexuality and love is part of that, you know, and appreciating somebody as the goddess or the god is, it's like we should be enacting these rituals, liturgies, every time we make love, every time we go for a walk in the woods, you know. And that's what the sort of the green Mary Magdalene would be about. And that's, I think, why the Wiccans and the neo-pagans like to do all their rituals in the woods at Beltane. They've got this intuitive love of nature going on, which is absolutely to be commended. Okay, then there's another theme. And this is the question of spiritualism, which is the thing I'm interested in as a scholar of religions. Spiritualism started in the 1840s, the Fox sisters, this idea that you could have empirical contact with the afterlife. Christianity had degenerated into faith, meaning there's no proof, we don't know anything, but we believe there's life after death. Well, along comes the 1840s when people actually experience contact with the afterlife, start channeling it, and having raps and, you know, tables moving and all that, and the Ouija board. So this is very interesting. And of course, spiritualists have been contacting Mary Magdalene on and off ever since. But I'm asking, as a historian, has anyone studied all these different, you know, contacts? In my experience with the spiritualist community, there's too much emphasis among these mediums on contacting your granny or your auntie who's got a message for you. Or, you know, there's very little contacting like what I would call the high saints or the peaks. So I don't know, it's a question. There's more research to be done on the history of spiritualism and in relation to Mary Magdalene. For instance, Lady Caithness was a spiritualist and a theosophist in France. She was doing seances, as the French called them, and contacting some Cathars. And out of that arose the modern Gnostic French church, because some of these Cathar bishops contacted them. You know, so somebody should write the history of all this, spiritualism and the Cathars, Mary Magdalene, etc. That leads on to the next topic, which is, and it's an offshoot. So spiritualism in the 1840s, Victorian era. Nowadays, it became called channeling. So there's the spiritualist in the old days was in a seance room, darkened lights, you know, would get the messages through. Nowadays, it's more going to be in the light. It's somebody will go in and get some channeling, as it's called. Well, so who's been channeling Mary Magdalene? Well, the answer is quite a lot of people. One of them is a woman called Sylvia Brown, who was a controversial American psychic, who wrote a book called Two Marys, The Hidden History of the Mother and Wife of Jesus. And she claims this is all channelings that she received. I can't vouch or not for it, but all I'm saying as a scholar is, let's study all these channelings. One of the difficulties I have is that they're contradictory. And if you look at what I've managed to piece together, you know, they say different things. Now, so going back to my sort of Occam's razor thing about truth as a historian, I want to somehow have a way of verifying channelings. I don't know how. I'm not a channeler myself, although I obviously get intuitive, you know, downloads, I call them. But I don't claim to be a channeler. But I don't know who's studying channelers and who's establishing a verification system, because some are frauds, some are deliberate frauds, apparently, which I find shocking, but I think it's true. So, I mean, another one is Alice Bailey, whose work, I do know people that knew Alice Bailey. She struck me as a pretty genuine person, although she knew Carl Jung and he wasn't 100% convinced. And she knew Olga Frieber-Kapteyn, who founded the Uranus lectures in Switzerland. And they were, yeah, they're important, the Uranus lectures. I don't think they've ever looked at Mary Magdalene as a topic. I think they ought to. Somebody should write to them. We should get it on the agenda, because they're like at the heart of the analytical Jungian tradition. They went off and did 10 years on the I Ching and got a bit lost, but they've come back now. My next topic, coming towards the end, is, and I mentioned this in my talk last year, I did a sort of talk on comparative diabology, right? I founded a new discipline, which is long overdue, which is the comparative study of the devil in different religions. Nobody likes the devil. He has a very bad name, but we kind of all like to hate him, you know, and he comes in different guises and so on. And he's definitely part of the bad news of history. Why is it related to Mary Magdalene? Is because the Gospels are full of the devil. Christ is always fighting off the devil in one form or another. And if you've seen the Passion of Christ, you know, it's a visceral relationship that's going on. Christ is at war with the devil, right? And Mary Magdalene, by definition, is too. And so, you know, what is all that about? Did they believe in a literal devil? Do Christians have to therefore believe in a literal devil? And what does that mean? You know, I mean, the founder of Scientology, Ron Hubbard, made the devil a space alien who'd enslaved human beings and made us all brain dead. And now he's in a cave in the Pyrenees. So Scientology has a particular devil theory, that the devil is a nasty space alien who's imprisoned in the Pyrenees. Could be in Mount Bugarach, so Susie, watch out. But it's a serious problem. We talked earlier about evil. So theodicy, you know, what is evil? I've been studying Stalin's reign of terror. I mean, this is evil. It seems to me it's something, I mean, about, you know, the opposite of sacred sexuality. What these evil people do, like Stalin, Hitler, and so on, is they misuse the human body. They literally assault it, abuse it, cut it up, and burn it, and kill it. You know, so they have no understanding of the sacredness of the human body. And so what you're trying to do, what Annalisa is trying to do with her revitalization, sacredness of the female body, you know, is part of the antidote to this evil, which is about desacralizing the human body. And, you know, that's going on. We have, in our COVID world, it's as if we're surrounded by evil on all sides, and it's now become disinformation. One thing we know about evil from Zoroastrianism, and they invented the idea of the devil, the Zoroastrians, is that the real tool and weapon of Angra Mainyu, who's the devil, is lies. Lies dominate wherever the devil walks. And the only antidote to the devil is truth. And that's what the Seishant brings at the end of time, which is the origin of the Christ myth. It's in a Zoroastrian storyline, a plot. So that's worth holding on to. Only truth can defeat Angramenu. So I would ask people to reflect on, for instance, the whole conspiracy theories about Trump, about what's called QAnon. Their theory is a diabolical dualism. So Trump is good, Republicans are good, Democrats and liberals are bad, and they're evil pedophiles. They're responsible for eating babies, and you wouldn't believe what they're responsible for. Now, this is a new Gnostic dualism that's appeared in American culture. It's like a new religious movement, which I find disturbing because it's inverting all the values. I was brought up to believe liberal is good. I'm a Canadian, so I like Trudeau and the liberals, whereas these guys say they're the devil. So I'm very confused. I'm awash in a sea of misinformation and lies, and I'm clutching for the lifeboat of truth. How do we get out of it? Well, I think when I asked Anaya Sophia how we conquer the anti-Mary Magdalene, I raised the paradox. I said, okay, there's an antichrist. So is there an anti-Mary Magdalene? And we had an interesting exchange on that. And I said, well, how do we defeat them? And she said, only psychologically. You have to defeat them internally. The internal anti-Mary Magdalene or antichrist. So maybe that's the key to comparative diabology, is conquered through introspective enlightenment and spiritual maturity, spiritual enlightenment. So, and that's the Mary Magdalene's gospel, the fragment we have that has been referred to here in this conference, is a psychological map to navigate beyond and through the demons or the archons. And it's a very profound document. And, you could sort of update it for our times and rewrite it and add the missing bits. I think there's a project for next year, if we live through. Yes, so, and there's a phrase by Jung that I quite like. I'd rather be whole than good. I think from a Jungian perspective, we have to integrate Christ and Antichrist, Mary Magdalene and anti-Mary Magdalene, and come out whole out of this into a place of peace, which is integral. And to me, evil is when the part mistakes itself for the whole and therefore wants power over domination, etc., etc. Whereas love is the surrender of the part to the whole. It's the opposite function. So then we come to the question of, oh, by the way, when I talked about Eros, I forgot to mention love studies as part of that. And I published the only journal in the world, the only academic journal on the nature of love. I'd invite anyone that's listening to wants to contribute, do a little article on love and I'll publish it, because to me, that is the hidden frontier. Several people have mentioned love in this day's proceedings. I think that was the secret of Christ and Mary Magdalene. And we need to bring that out. The Times newspaper won't be interested because it's not news, but it is actually. And love studies is so important. It was, that American professor of psychology in California that pioneered love studies. And, I've taken that idea and launched a journal on it. And I've published a book called Wisdom Affairs, which features Mary Magdalene and Jesus as an example. You see, I think that a love affair at its highest form is what I call a wisdom affair. And so I've got them along with about 100 other examples of couples that make a conscious commitment to use their relationship as a sacred vehicle towards mutual enlightenment, not just, titillation or whatever, or economic self-advantage. Okay, moving on, coming to the end. Mary Magdalene and comparative religious studies is a whole new field. That would be very exciting to explore, because Christ has been claimed by Buddhists. There's a whole literature that Christ spent time studying in the Buddhist world. In Takshila is one of the most likely monastic schools where they were studying. Very probable. Also in Hinduism, there are yogis that claim that Christ was practicing yoga, that they also know how to walk on water, and everything he was doing as a siddhi that they've been doing for centuries. And I've got books, Christ as a yogi. There's tantric teachers that are saying that Christ and Mary Magdalene were practicing a form of tantra. So what is tantra? There's a whole field there to explore. And then there's reclaiming Mary Magdalene for Jewish studies. And we've had a guest here on, several friends from Israel who've been coming and going. Jewish studies is not sitting peacefully, it's doing its own thing, and it's got a very strong women's reclaiming Jewish studies, Jewish identity. The women of the Bible are coming out of the closet, and the whole Kabbalah is based on gender parity and gender interconnectedness. If you look at the pillars of the tree of life, you have the male pillar and the female pillar and the central pillar. And I argue in my commentary, I've done a commentary on the Gospels, all 6. That's as well as Mary Magdalene and Thomas. And I read the Gospels through the lens of the Kabbalah. It's the only way to make sense of them, I believe. Because the Kabbalah is esoteric oral Judaism. Of course, Christ was a practitioner of that. That's what he meant when he said, before Abraham was, I am. It means my lineage of transmission that I'm speaking from is way older than Abraham, because it came from the great goddess herself, Sophia, the holy Shekinah, and Yahweh, who we now know as a moon god from ancient Hamitic Egypt. Well, so Jewish scholars are reclaiming this. Mary Magdalene, I think, and Judaism, there shouldn't be a conflict between, are you Jewish, are you Christian, whatever. No, nonsense. It's all one bigger wisdom, right? And also Sufism and the Islamic tradition. This is a whole new frontier to explore, and we've got, colleagues, hopefully they'll speak at next year's conference, but there's now huge evidence that Muhammad's visions in the cave and that in the Quran were inspired by Gnostic sources. He'd encountered in the deserts on his travels Gnostic-inspired visionaries who, because a lot of the teachings of the Quran come from the Gnostic Judeo-Christian traditions. And although there's no mention of Mary Magdalene as such, the implication is there. As somebody pointed out earlier, Mary, I think, all prophets had their wives, right? That's just like standard. And so, of course, Jesus did. So anyway, there's a lot of research to be done on the Gnostic roots of the Quran. I'm doing a commentary on the Quran, which I'm just about to finish. 6 years work. But it's amazing, mind-blowing stuff. The Quran is amazing to die for if you read it Gnostically, if you read it Kabbalistically. Not literally, not as a tool for, warism. So we have a job to do hermeneutically to reclaim the sacred scriptures, the Gospels, the Bible, the Old Testament, New Testament. There isn't an Old and a New Testament. It's all one testament, right? Reclaim them all with a sacred hermeneutic of wonder and love and unity. And that, I think, is what Mary Magdalene and Jesus would ask of us. And there's clues in the Quran, for instance, at the top of the Quran, in some of the surahs, there's letters, A-L-M, well, it's a Kabbalistic sign. This is saying, look, these are the sounds that make you interpret this surah in a certain way, which I've explained in my book, The Kabbalistic Runes. Now, very interestingly, at a place called Hira, which was on the frontiers between, Persia, the Persian Empire, which was Zoroastrian, and the Arab world, Medina and Mecca and all that, there was this kingdom called the Lakhmid Kingdom, which was Arab. It had a city, but it was in that kingdom they invented the Arabic alphabet. And it was Manichaeans who invented the Arabic alphabet. And my speculation is that Muhammad went there several times as a caravan trader there were routes through from the hijab, as it's called, through there. And he sat down with these Manichaeans who taught him Gnostic esoteric Christianity, which became the Quran, which became Islam, as it came through his transpersonal channelings, if you want. Now, why that's very interesting. So it's a frontier zone where Gnosticism was flourishing. And I speculate, here's another question. It's often frontiers where you get the most bubbling up of esoteric stuff, where a bit like where tectonic plates clash, you get energy. So it's the same between religions. Where the Persian Empire met the Roman, Byzantine, and Arabic pagan, tectonic plates meet, you get Islam born. I would say the Pyrenees are another frontier region, and the reason for its deep esoteric origins, if Mary Magdalene was attracted to that part of the world, why she ended up there is because it's a frontier region, and frontier people like frontier places. Galilee was another frontier region. I realized this when I went to Galilee. It's not in Jerusalem. It's way out of Jerusalem mentally. When you're in Galilee on the Hill of the Beatitudes, you're in a different world. You're closer to Phoenicia than Jerusalem. You're thinking Cyprus. You're thinking Damascus. You're thinking frontiers. And the route, the Silk Route to China, went past the northern end of the Sea of Galilee. And young Matthew was the guy selling the tickets for the Silk Route. It's now thought that he, this is how Jesus got to Takshila. He just took off at one point in his youth. So anyway, there's some thoughts. And finally, I want to end up, the last theme I want to mention is Mary Magdalene and philosophical studies. I've talked about religious studies and so on. I think there's a place for Mary Magdalene studies to overlap with philosophy. Not enough people do real philosophy anymore. When I went to university and tried to study philosophy, it was like logical positivism and ridiculous nonsense. It took me years to realize there is actually a school of living philosophy, and it goes back to the ancient Greeks, Parmenides, Plato. I know that Aristotle came in for a bit of a knock from Annalisa, and that's fine, and Plato, but they were actually very deep savants. They were pagan thinkers who were in love with the goddess. I'm sorry if they didn't express that properly in their writings. But we've got to remember with Aristotle, we only have some of his lecture notes. We don't have his actual writings. His esoteric teachings are different. And I think that Parmenides puts it into poetry. The way to the goddess is the path to truth. And Peter Kingsley's work on the goddess of wisdom, who comes to us in darkness, in seclusion, in the cave, is an example. Now, Hegel, I think, should be rediscovered by the new generation, because Hegel knew everything about the esoteric Hermetic traditions that people are studying, the Kabbalah, Sufism, Tibetan Buddhism. Hegel was the master of all that lot. He tried to put it into a synthesis that everybody could understand. Of course, not everybody could understand because it's complex, but if you read Hegel's lectures on the philosophy of religion, it's more easy. What did Hegel have to say about Christianity? Well, he was explaining the metaphysics of unity, which some of our other speakers talked about at the beginning. I think Mary talked about that. Well, Hegel was trying to explain it in detail, and we would do well to go back to that. Marx totally misunderstood Hegel. Marx never read Hegel. Marx completely misread and misrepresented. Although, he wanted to get that universal enlightenment out for everybody, and there's no harm with that. I also, because I coordinate philosophers to peace globally, the reason I'm interested in Mary Magdalene is I want to find the key to peace. I believe that the suppressed feminine, the goddess voice, which she stands for, is part of the key to peace. And as a philosopher, I'm saying, let's get the women's voices. It's a great, back in philosophy, reclaiming academia. Academia is dedicated to the worship of the 9 muses, but who worships the 9 muses anymore? Let every university in India has a statue of Sarasvati, the goddess. I would like every university in the West to have a statue of the 9 muses and Athena. to remember, to remind us as we walk in there that we're doing sacred work. Academics are devotees of the goddess, but we've forgotten it. And no wonder the West is like, we've ended up down this cul-de-sac of materialist science, as if mathematical science and technology is the only thing that matters. No, my friends, it's not. It's the humanities, the arts, theatre, poetry, and wonder that matter. And that is the sacred work that Mary Magdalene calls us to do with the equality of female and male, the linking of love and the mind, the heart and the intellect. And that's the sacred marriage we have to do. So to conclude, before we end with our ritual, Mary Magdalene is far too important to be left only to the experts, right? They write their learned articles in learned journals and nobody reads them. But she's also too important not to have the findings of those experts in front of us when we discuss her. You know, we should honor the experts, the theologians, the archaeologists, the linguists, and so on. But her message is too universal to be only left there, right? And I think that she may well be the key to the secret of what Jesus was on about all those years ago and the complexity of it, and therefore part of the key to world peace, then and now. And so that's why, from a peace studies perspective, I've, you know, taken this initiative, and so, yeah, from a peace studies angle, that's the last theme that I just want to float there. And that raises huge things like racial conflict, ethnic conflict, religious conflict. Yeah, so we all need to be getting on with doing some peace magic and turn this situation around. So look, I think that that's enough from me, right? Thank you so much. And I'm hoping that, well, if there's any questions, feel free to ask. And we have our supposed priestess coming in to do the final ritual for us. That is Amanda. Let me just check if she's joining us. Any questions to what I was saying there? Any comments you'd like to make? Now's your chance.
I have a question, Dr. Thomas. You mentioned so accurately that a lot of times academics talk about their learned subjects, but they only kind of keep them within to one another and publish them for one another. So have you started a Mary Magdalene journal for this kind of stuff to go out there?
Not yet, but I'm thinking of doing it this year before we meet again. We do this every year on the 22nd of July. I think it's time to do it now because, you know, it would be good. And academics love, you know, publishing their papers. So I think we should get it together. And if you want to help, you're very welcome. We'll get you involved.
Okay, let's talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.
Great.
Yes.
Great.
Any other questions? Belinda, do you want to, you've told me something about the Dominicans. Do you want to make your point in public to everyone?
I can do.
Go for it.
Hello, Thomas.
Hi.
Hello. Yes, I'd just like to share that nobody's mentioned this, but on many occasions when I've visited the cave of St. Baum, I've tried to communicate with some of the brothers and sisters there the deep irony that I find in the fact that they still run the cave of St. Baum to be deeply disturbing. The suppression of the voice of Mary Magdalene comes from that direction, and I feel that the fact that they still run that space stifling. Yes, I actually find it deeply disturbing, to be honest with you. With a gift shop outside the cave, and yeah, it just doesn't sit well at all.
Well, I haven't been there yet. I can't comment on that, but I mean, there is this paradox. The Dominicans take her as their mascot.
Yes.
She's their guardian, you know. I did actually invite I tried to contact a Dominican academic theologian. I reached out to them. I contacted them. None of them got back to me. Not a single one, right? Yes. And I'm still going to carry on. I'm going to keep at the Dominicans. I'm not going to let them get away with it. And because they ought to be part of this conversation, I think.
Absolutely. And you speak of a time of the whole concept of truth and reconciliation. And honestly, I believe that if there is to be any way forward in unleashing the feminine power in this world, there needs some kind of truth and reconciliation, some point of healing. That being a minute part of it, but the fact that it's just accepted into sort of common day occurrence to me it just appears to be really absurd. And the fact that nobody questions it, even more absurd, actually. It's a control and a stifling to my mind of that space of the sacred feminine. It really is.
Because I get feedback.
Just my point of view, yeah.
Right. You want to come with me? Yeah. You'll be out of shot.
No, it's a valid point of view. So thanks for sharing that, Belinda.
And could I say something to Belinda? Just a moment, brief thing. I totally agree with you. I've had those thoughts and haven't expressed them, which is an important thing for us to learn to find our voice. But I wanted to tell you that in October of 2016, the Catholic Bishop of Palmiers, he walked with a group of people to Foix, and there was this walking pilgrimage to Montségur, and he knelt before the Black Madonna.
Yes.
In that reconciliation, you're aware of that, right?
Yes, yes.
That was an incredible moment and an opening for other things to happen, which nothing else took place really, but some Cathar women were there, and it was a very poignant and an important possibility for opening. So we could call to that and call it forward.
Yes, absolutely. Because I do believe that in order for some space of healing to take place, more of that should be taking place. I live in South Africa, so the whole concept of truth and reconciliation plays a huge role in any type of healing, in any type of forward momentum, in any type of movement. So I think the church should be called out on this, actually, and there needs to be some forward path in the light of truth and reconciliation for healing to take place.
Thank you for that comment. Well, I'll keep trying to contact the Dominicans. They have a group at the University of Oxford. They have a Dominican house, and Timothy Radcliffe is the head of the Dominicans in England. He's quite a clever chap, so I'll keep on at them. I suppose, you see, their problem would be if they were sitting in, and let's say there's a Dominican to speak now, they would find it difficult because they're sworn to celibacy. They have this ingrained attitude that sexuality is something not spiritual. You have to leave it behind. If you're serious, if you want to be a serious monk, you put sexuality behind you. And, you know, and so to be told that no, the body is sacred and menstrual blood is holy and all that, I mean, they would have run out screaming.
Absolutely outrageous, yes.
It's totally the opposite end of the spectrum.
Oh, no.
So there's a big work here, how to bridge the sort of, you know, we're the cutting edge, if you want. Well, those guys are a few hundred years behind. And if they had the power, we'd all be burned, let's face it, you know. So I think softly, we can change this. As I said in my talk, it's about heresy and orthodoxy are twin poles of a constantly moving ball. You know, if you watch a ball on the waves, it's spinning. And we have this dynamic at work. Whoever's in power at any one time calls the other guys the heretics. You know, when the pagans were running Rome, they called the Christians the heretics and persecuted them mercilessly. When the Christians got into power with Constantine, they started persecuting the pagans mercilessly. And, you know, like the ball went the other way. What I would pray for is some kind of Gnostic mediation based on enlightenment, where both pagans, Christians, everyone else stops persecuting everyone else, and we get on with the enlightenment work, the spiritual work. That's my peace agenda. And that's why, by the way, if you don't know, I set up the multi-faith, multicultural mediation service. It's the only interfaith mediation service that exists. It's ridiculous, but it's the only one. I'm welcome to train up new volunteers. And I got the idea for that when I went to the Vatican to a conference of faith leaders in 1995 with the previous Pope, John Paul II, who was a great man. I loved him. You know, we were all there, religious leaders, for peace. And I looked around the hall and I said, well, what are you actually doing for peace? Not just coming to conferences and making speeches. And I thought, well, these guys ought to train as mediators. So that's an ongoing service. I ought to, you know, focus on getting some top Dominicans to come and explain their position, I think. The trouble is, of course, the church still has the power of silencing people. And if you stray outside the boundaries of permitted discourse, you get disciplined, as Matthew Fox experienced, who was a kind of radical peace Dominican. Yeah, so, you know, how do we have the conversation about truth without running into the Inquisition? You know, discuss. Yeah. Can I just ask, who is Mac? Is that by any chance anyone called Amanda who's supposed to be joining us in the last few minutes? Amanda Caza Radcliffe, is she in the room? Susie, do you know if Amanda's joining us? She was going to end our ceremony with Susie.
Yeah, Amanda has prepared everything. She's just coming right now.
Oh, she's coming right now. Okay, so we're waiting for her. Give her your. Are you going to let her sit there? Are you going to give her your seat or what? How is this?
She's at the other end of the table.
Okay, okay. So if you turn the camera around, we're looking forward to Amanda. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. No, it's just
Thomas, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can see you, Amanda. Hello, welcome. Greetings.
Hi. Greetings. Here we are again.
Here we are again, meeting at the end of the world. It's jolly good.
Yes, indeed. Hello to everybody else. I have been listening in, even though I haven't been on video.
yeah.
We got a little bit of feedback happening. Please, do you want to come over here?
I'm muting.
Right. Okay, so yeah, it's been a really interesting conference. Thank you, everybody. You need to, your chair, you may want to turn your video off.
Turn it off?
I think so, yeah. There we go. Okay, so Thomas, I think my sound has gone, perhaps.
No, I had muted myself. I can hear you fine, Amanda. Do
Okay.
introduce yourself. The idea of the Mary Magdalene Studies came up because Amanda and I were discussing the suppression of women's voices. Amanda studied feminist theology at Liverpool and studied transpersonal psychology and is British, but then ended up in France, involved with lots of Gnostic traditions. And so You know, and then ended up living in the heartland of the Pyrenees in Montségur. So Amanda brings with her a lot of both academic knowledge, but also spiritual wisdom. And I've asked her to end our conference today and also maybe do a little blessing or ritual, whatever you want to do. So thank you for joining us. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Yes, I've been involved in the French Gnostic Church for about 5 years now. I was ordained in 2016 in Paris after a few years of study. And I'm also involved, I listened earlier to the conversation about Freemasonry, and I am involved in Freemasonry here in France also, as you know, Thomas. And the French Gnostic Church, which has been recreated out of the French Gnostic revival of the 19th century. And this one that I'm involved in has a very high focus on the feminine divine, in particular Mary Magdalene, of course, but not only Mary Magdalene. And it comes out of the spiritualist movement of Jules Doinel and Lady Caithness, but it also has apostolic succession through the Orthodox Church. And the lineage goes through several prominent French esotericists. And so, yes, this evening, I know everyone's had a very long day. There's been so much information to take in. And so I thought we'd begin just by taking a few moments to center ourselves and come back to our own individual selves after so much happening. And then I'm going to do a little reading and then close with a very small mass. How does that sound, Thomas? Okay, great. Okay, so Susie's going to accompany me with a little bit of singing. I heard earlier on, Annalisa, that you were talking about thunder, perfect mind, and it's one of the texts that I use very frequently within my Gnostic Mass. I use it every single time, in fact, and I have also made the same connections between this text and Mary Magdalene that you were discussing. So I found that very interesting, and I relate also very much to what you were saying as a performance artist, because I have done similar work myself here in France, going to different sacred sites and using my body as a ritual object. So to illustrate the sacredness that's still inherent in the edifices of patriarchy. So I'd love to talk further with you about that when we get a moment, because I found your talk very fascinating. Yeah. My own work is more on the esoteric level, but rather than talk about it, let's just do it, I think. Yeah. Okay, so everybody, I'm going to read Thunder Perfect Mind, not the whole poem, because it's so long, but I think we will end with reading Thunder, and then the Mass that I will deliver is called Our Lady of the Void, and she connects in with the Black Madonna and with Mary Magdalene, with Sarah Kali. So I feel like she is definitely a priestess of our time. I was sent forth from the power. I have come to thee, who reflect upon me. I have been found amongst those who seek for me, for I am the first and the last. I am the honoured one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the utterance of my name. I am the one who has been loved everywhere and hated everywhere. I am the one whom they call life, but you call death. I am peace, but war has come because of me. I am control and the uncontrollable. I am union and I am dissolution. I am the abiding and the dissolving. I am sinless, yet the root of sin derives from me. I am truth, and I am iniquity. I am the sound of my name. I am the one who alone exists, and I have no one who will judge me. I would like us to take a moment now to call upon us the presence of the divine Mary Magdalene. I give thanks to all of you who've talked today about her and who has honored her. I call forth her blessings to rain down upon all of you, upon all of us, and upon this entire world at this time. May her healing balm be spread upon us. May we walk forward always in her name. May we step on the path of righteousness. May we find within us the balance, harmonization represented by she and Yeshua. May the one who came forth be reminded and remembered at all times. And may we always remember the name of Gnosis. I'm going to begin the Mass. Today, we commune with the void to celebrate the union of Our Lady Magdalena and her consort, because the void and the fullness unite to bring life, and they join together to bring us the life eternal. On your knees, brothers and sisters, and prepare you in silence. Present me the chalice. The Aeon Christos took the bread and the wine, and he broke, and he blessed, and he sanctified, and he said, "This is my body, this is my blood." And we bring down upon us the blessings of the Holy Spirit, the Holy Sophia Magdalene, to be present with us now. The ritual of the Mass celebrates the divination of the flesh, not the escape from the flesh. In the Gnostic tradition, in my Gnostic tradition, it's not about escaping the flesh, it's about divinization of the flesh. And so the Mass, the liturgy, the drinking of the blood, the touching of the bread, the ingesting of the body of Christ is about the divination of our humanity, not the escaping of our humanity. And the Magdalene represents, again, as the Christos, the presence of the Spirit within the flesh. And the exaltation of that Spirit falls down upon us now, exalting all of us to our divine nature. This is the way of the Magdalene, and the way of the Christos, and the divine union in which we now partake. And so on all of your behalves, I drink this chalice for all of you, that you may all be exalted in the name of our holy, holy Mary Magdalene on this her feast day, here in the south of France. I drink to you all, and I send you my blessings. I share this with Susie. Here you are, Susie. This is the spiritual body of the Christos and the Magdalena. Drink and be exalted. Beautiful. The chalice is intoxicating and pure. We take the chalice of salvation in our hands, and we call upon the name of the Lord and Our Lady Magdalena. Kneel and adore. May the greatest light guard our souls in eternal life. And may the Lady of the Void descend upon us, bringing now all of her blessings into the materiality of our lives, in every aspect of our lives. Everything looks to her without thinking. She helps us to defeat all of the things which ail us, and she gives life to all that has faded. She bathes us in the root of kindness. She grants the saints the honors of the world. She is the one whom we love as Jesus loved her, his Father. She is the infinite sea of compassion and the pure, clear wind of the Holy Spirit. Her clarity purifies us and goes beyond all grace. Amen. Once more, I drink from this chalice, and I send you all the blessings of the Magdalene here in the south of France on this day. And thank you all for sharing this moment with me, and for all that you have done today in her name. And to close, I would just like to read another little something. It's from the Apocryphal Acts of Philip, and it's about Mariamne. I know that some of us have talked about Mariamne before. Anyway, Mariamne and a little story about what happens in the martyrdom. And Mariamne said, Alikaman, Ikasame, Marmari, Iakaman, Mastanaman, Akaman, which means daughter of the Father, my lady, who was given as a pledge to the serpent. Christ has come to thee. And Nicanor said, I am a Hebrew. Speak to me in my father's tongue. I heard you preaching and I was healed. And Mariamne prayed for her. But her tyrant husband came and said, how is this? Who healed you? And she said to her husband, depart from me and lead a chaste and sober life. But the husband dragged her by her hair and threatened to kill her. And so the apostles were arrested. And they were scourged and dragged to the temple. The priests and people came and demanded vengeance on the sorcerers. And the proconsul was afraid of his wife, for he had been almost blinded by a wonderful light when he looked through the window and saw her praying. So they stripped and searched the apostles for charms, and they pierced Philip's ankles and thighs and hung him head downward. And Bartholomew they hung naked by the hair. But Mariamne, on being stripped, became like an arc of glass, full of light and fire, and everyone saw her and ran away. Thank you.
I love that last thing you read. So thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing that with us. And thank you to everyone who's been part of the day here. If anyone, now's a chance to ask any questions you have to Amanda, who's been studying up close and, you know, the esoteric traditions. So if anyone wants to ask a question, now's a chance. I'm sure that we could spend a few more minutes online. Some people were interested in Freemasonry, and that was somebody earlier. I'm not sure if that person is still with us.
Okay, I'll ask a question. Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. You mentioned before you started the ritual that you had also gone to some sacred sites and done some special reclaiming rituals. Would you mind elaborating on that or giving some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. Reclaiming rituals. I love that description that you use, and it's something I hadn't considered to use myself, but that is exactly what it is that we're doing. Yeah, one of the very similar to your own work, actually. I think one of the rituals that I did involved going to a church dedicated to Mary Magdalene here in the south of France, situated in a very remote place, and like you, somehow embodying that energy naked and having a series of photographs taken of that ritual. And there have been several other areas that I've been to where I've done the same thing, and really for the same reasons as you, which is to, why should the female body be seen as sinful? Why should it be excluded from the church? And yet we have an image of death and torture, you know, Jesus on the cross. Why should sexuality be seen as evil, women's bodies be seen as fallen? And so my aim with my work is to create new psychoactive iconography for us as women to see ourselves as sacred by placing my body into these sacred sites and being photographed in a ritualistic setting.
Yeah, that sounds really powerful. And I'm sure you also feel something transforming inside of yourself when you do these?
Absolutely, hugely, yes. It's been a medicine journey, I'm sure, the same for you.
Yes.
Consistent initiation.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that and for your beautiful ritual today. Thank you.
Whilst we're waiting for anyone else that wants to say, let me just link that with your comments about Athena in Portland, I think, using her body, the sacredness of the female nakedness, to stop militarism and to stop, you know, a police attack and rubber bullets and so on. I see the connection. Amanda going into the church and, you know, saying, why can't I reclaim the church for this, Eros? And what Athena was doing, you know. I'm sure that there's okay, let me let you into a secret, right? Nobody, well, I don't know if anyone, I might have shared this with a few people here. When I went to Tara in Ireland, I was the Archdruid of Britain's Peace Druids, I still am. And we were there to make peace with the IRA and the Irish Druids. And we had a Druid ceremony. We didn't strip off. We were in our robes and we had our magic, you know, staves and things. We're all doing chants and whatever. And I got this download of an alternative word to terrorism. The IRA declared a ceasefire, and it was the end of the war of Ireland, which was a bloody, terrible war of terrorists. And I got this download up on the hill of Tara, we should call what we're doing joyism. We are joyists. We're not terrorists. We're joyists. And so I wrote this, I went back totally on fire with this, and I wrote a whole philosophical thing about joyism, which I published. As you can use joyism in the same way that terrorists use terrorism. You do a ritual, only it's non-violent, it's erotic, it's beautiful, and it brings people together. So I'm interested in the scientific study and practice of joyism as an alternative to get what you want politically. So if the Palestinians had used joyism instead of terrorism, they'd have their state by now. You know, instead of blowing up Israeli nightclubs and usual old boring terrorism, that is so passé, so old, last century, right? We should be using joyism. And what you ladies are doing with you're using your body or Athena, that is a joyous ritual. But I think that there's a whole new field here to be explored. You know, joyism. I've just coined the word, and nobody uses it. Why not? There's whole institutes to study terrorism and terrorists. We've got to change the conversation and start talking about joyism and joyous studies. That's what our day is about. And I'm sure that Jesus and Mary Magdalene, they were joyists. They were doing their sacred rituals, you know, and they were saying to the Roman soldiers, for God's sake, get with the new message, you know. And here we are, I can't believe it, 2,000 years later, and there's still people haven't heard the joyous message. They're still doing old style terrorism. I mean, for God's sake. Anyway, I just wanted to throw joyism in as a word to you. Yeah. Any other questions to any of our speakers, Amanda, and anyone that's still with us, Annalisa, etc. Otherwise, we're going to shortly end our lovely day.
I have a logistical question. How do we stay in touch with one another?
Right, so we have a Facebook group, quite an active Facebook group called the Mary Magdalene Studies Association. Join that. You'll get regular postings from me and others, and you'll get endless postings from the guy that's saying there is no Mary Magdalene. He's really using it as evangelical stuff. I love him. He's so scholarly. It's really amazing. But you know, you can post stuff. Please use it. It's your vehicle to tell us what you're doing with your joyous rituals. Amanda, you use it, and whoever. And I will be posting on there when this recording is finally uploaded to our YouTube channel over the next week or 2 or 3. We'll upload the talks, and hopefully, God willing, if it's all recorded as it should have done, it'll all be there, and you can listen to it, tell your friends, pass it, share it. Get the message out there. This is a joyous event, and you know, the church. I mean, Amanda, your point is so correct. It's unbelievable to me that the church is full of the naked, dying, tortured body of Christ. And that's okay, you know. And yet, as you say, eros, libido is totally left out. And that's heretical. I mean, it seems to me we do have to do a reinversion thing here. And we have to we have to switch the heresy and orthodoxy around a bit. I just want to add one thing that I rushed over in my talk. There's another chap and there was a whole other thing about Mary Magdalene in relation to what is called queer theory. In academia, there's a lovely, rich field of discussion about gender and eros and gay and lesbian and queer theory. And Mary Magdalene is really, they love her because she's she challenges all the conventional theories about what eros is for, and so there's a whole field there. And I was going to add in slightly naughtily about Leonardo da Vinci and the link to the Holy Blood, Holy Grail theory, because he is reputed, some gays argue Leonardo was homosexual. Well, I think he was what I called, I don't know what the word is, pansexual, transsexual, hypersexual. I mean, for him, everything is eros. So a beautiful, it doesn't matter the gender of the body, it's the quality of the mind, I think, for people like that. They were doing, you know, erotic platonic love, if you want, what I call a wisdom affair. And so, so there's a whole other field of discourse that I didn't have time to mention, but I've sneaked it in now in the discussion. And I think maybe that's why the Mona Lisa was grinning. Maybe she knew Leonardo's secret. There's a theory. Discuss. Yes. Right. So yeah, we can keep in touch. Oh, Dana, why don't you add something? You've been coming in and out today. I want to introduce Dana from, well, Hawaii, Polynesia, but hanging out in Nevada on lockdown. But it's her birthday. She's lucky to have a Mary Magdalene birthday today. So how much have you heard of our talks, Dana?
Oh, hi everyone, aloha. Unfortunately, my body, like I fell asleep last night without being able to set an alarm, and then I woke up at 5:15 a.m. and I should have stayed up and listened, but my body couldn't quite do it because it's such a big time difference here. So I only came in, you know, towards the end, like sort of for your talk, Thomas, and I would love to hear the recording, like when you get it on Zoom. It downloads on Zoom right away, so you could send people the link to access that on Zoom. But I feel disappointed because I wanted to get up at 5:15, then I could have heard more, but I have a big day today, so maybe that wasn't what my body wanted me to do. But I'm very curious. I'm interested in the mystery of Mary Magdalene and the tradition, and especially her energy, and I appreciated receiving some of that energy in the last ritual that we just did together.
And for those that don't know your work, Dana, somebody mentioned the Institute of Heart Math and talked about the heart in an earlier talk. Lena, who's, I don't think she's still with us.
Oh yeah, that's the one I could have gotten up for at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, yeah. Well, you'll hear it on, well, when it's uploaded, you'll hear it. Tell us about the heart and why you think that's important, what your research taught you.
Well, I've studied the role of the heart in consciousness for many years. I was a researcher at the Heart Math Institute. I came there very young when I was just 23, and I spent 12 years on the scientific research team of the Heart Math Institute. And we were studying the role of the heart as a bigger connection to our higher intelligence, to a higher dimension of our awareness. Really proving out the idea of the heart that's been shared by almost every major civilization that has existed on Earth, and almost every major religion, at least in its earliest form, have looked at the heart as a conduit to spirit, to a bigger aspect of our intelligence. And so now the science is starting to provide confirmation that that's more than just a metaphor, and that the heart really does have its own source of intelligence. It has a brain within the heart itself. It communicates with the brain constantly. It informs our perception, our interpretation of the world. Input from the heart is always affecting the way our brain takes in information and processes information. And it also seems to connect us to an intuitive aspect of our intelligence, bigger than just the mind itself. And we can learn how to connect with our heart, to go into what we call coherence, which is a very harmonious state, the state really based in love. And then through those states of love, appreciation, gratitude, those kinds of heart-based feelings, that's how we can open up that bigger communication link with our higher dimensional intelligence. So that in essence, that's a lot of what my work was about, both the scientific study of the heart and also practical tools to help people connect with that intuitive intelligence of the heart. I think that really does tie in with what Mary Magdalene represented. and also the divine feminine energy that we can connect to through the heart. So yeah, I can put my email if anybody wants to be in touch with me.
Yeah, put it in the
nice to connect with all of you.
And it's your birthday, so happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, to everyone.
I'm honored to share a day with Mary Magdalene. And it's also the birthday of Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics. I always celebrated him too, because he was one of my scientific idols when I was studying biology in school. And it's also the birthday of Dr. Masaru Emoto, who studied water from an energetic perspective, which is one of my passions as well. So it's a big day. A lot of good people.
Sure. And you're having a water party later, aren't you?
I am, yeah. If anybody's interested in the higher dimensional properties of water, like water as an energetic communicator of information, this is a topic that I've been interested in for like 30 years, and I'm wanting to open up the exploration of that at a collective level. So I'm hosting a water party for my birthday and the birthday of Dr. Emoto, and that in a couple, just in about an hour from now, so I have to get ready for that. And I can put the Zoom link if you guys are interested. It's going to be a Zoom meeting.
If you put your email on the list on chat, and then we can contact you.
I'll put my email. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Mary. She mentioned heart math, so that's exciting. Yeah. Right. So look, I'm going to finish with reading the final little ritual. I started with this, so I'll finish with it, which is the reading from one of our former speakers, Joan Clark. She spoke at a conference for the Mary Magdalene Association. We'll be doing this each year, July 22nd, until the world is converted to Joyism and given up its addiction to terrorism. That's my pledge. As I say, I'm a peace activist and a peace theorist. And I'm trying to activate the magical powers of peacemaking. And so, you know, if you Google peace magic, my book will come up. And so all I can say in closing is it's been a great pleasure to host everyone and an honor. If anyone is in the middle of France, wants to come visit, there's a center here where we're doing this kind of work. And I'm not too far from Vézelay, so we can organize pilgrimages. Obviously under lockdown, it's not easy. But hopefully the University of Oxford or someone else will crack this coronavirus, and we'll capture the dark agents who've created the virus, and we'll convert them to the path of love. So look, thank you all for everyone that's been helping me behind the scenes. Here's the quote from today. Actually, I'm going to do the one from yesterday as well. And I would recommend, Amanda, if you haven't got, you met Joan Clark, I think. She was the perfume lady.
I did.
She made the scent that was based on what Jesus smelled like. Can you imagine? She got that download of how they smelled to each other, Mary Magdalene and Jesus. And, you know, she reckoned Mary Magdalene was like the aromatherapist of the disciples, using scented oils for healing. The end of a tired day of walking barefoot around Galilee, you needed a session with Mary Magdalene to chill you out with the right oils on your feet. I could do with that sometimes, I must say. So, and Joan has got these perfumes which she has in her center, but she also has written this book, and you need to get a copy of it, Amanda, and integrate it with your mass and your rituals. Each day of the year has got a little saying from Mary Magdalene that she's downloaded. I'm going to read the one from yesterday and today, okay, to finish. This is quite important. How do you forgive? From the heart or the mind? Forgiveness does not come from the mind, but from the heart. If it does not come from the heart, the pain and the past, the deed and the memory will be ever present. There will be no true healing. But as it comes from the heart, it is all washed away, by the grace of the divine love that is within you. It is the gift of the Holy Spirit. If you are still in pain, you have not forgiven. Ask Mary Magdalene to teach you how to forgive. Simply by being willing to forgive from the heart, unseen forces of love that resides within you will resurrect you and bring you to greater love and joy. Forgiveness is a gift to yourself, bringing you back into holiness. So I love that quote. I think that's very deep, and it relates to what we're talking about, the heart just now. That's from yesterday, July 21st. And I'm going to finish with today's, which is amazing as well. I am the Magdalene. I am here only to be truly helpful and to offer you the power of the light of the Christ that resides within you. As I have received the grace of my beloved to know my divinity, today, on my feast day, I would like to bequeath it to you. I desire that you receive and remember, as I have, that you and love are one, that you are the light and the love in the world, that the Father and the Mother and we are one. Celebrate today with Mary Magdalene her feast day, says Joan, and call her forth to receive the transmission of the light of Christ activation. Allow her to come into your heart and activate your soul's light. So thank you to Joan for that present. And again, thank you everyone who's taken part. Thank you to all our speakers. Not everyone's still with us, but those that are still here. And I think we're scattered in body, but we're united in spirit. Okay. Right. Any other final points somebody would like to make or comments? I think, as they say in the pagan part, we'll say, merry meet and merry part and merry meet again. Okay. Thank you so much. And so if you want to keep in touch, look at the Mary Magdalene Studies Association on Facebook, join it, and future events and so on, and publications. And Annalisa, good luck with that PhD, right? I'm so pleased to have met you, and any help you want, advice, whatever, I'm always here for you. And just to say, Tori Milner, who didn't join us, she's in Israel wandering about, God knows where. She gave a talk a couple of years ago about menstruation and the onset of it, and girls' circles that they're doing as initiatory, work. That's another side of the menstrual process for young women, instead of getting depressed and not knowing what they're doing with it. So I'll put you in touch with her. You can talk to each other, and I'm sure she'll watch your thing online. Yeah, fascinating. Excellent. Okay, bless you everyone, and thanks to Mary, who's all the way from Turkey. So we have people from America, Turkey, Israel, and France here, and Britain as well. Thank you, Nicola, for helping behind the scenes with all the media stuff. And Nicola is brilliant. She will be uploading, hopefully, and sorting out the technical side, which I'm not very good at. Okay, thank you. And keep up the joyism. Don't let the buggers get us down, right? We've got to reclaim this world. Excellent. Shalom, shalom.
Ciao.